Welcome to the webinar. You have entered as an attendee in listen-only mode.
Council members are present through teleconferencing, and I'd like to start this meeting by inviting Council Member Stewart to share a few comments.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know, I'm sure many of you have had days like this where trying to come up with words for your thoughts this last week or two has been pretty impossible, especially pretty impossible without a lot of emotion. Luckily, I had my cry this morning, so I'm better now. I really wanted to thank everyone from Race Matters and from all of those who helped organize the very nice, peaceful protest. As you know, or as many people know, we had thousands of people that showed up, tried to be as safe as possible with masks and try to keep as much distance as possible. And I really greatly appreciate all of the allies that showed up. There's many times that people say they're there for you and then they're not. And I think on Sunday, we saw a lot of people in this community show that they are here for all people. I also really wanted to thank the police force. I know yesterday was a little bit more difficult, but on Sunday I was so appreciative of all of the support that the police force showed us, and all of the officers were so respectful and so helpful. And I think that really says a lot about our community, that the police and the community of color can work together. So thank you for that. Today, Mayor Harmon, in your press conference, I am so thankful that we are looking at going beyond that $20,000 for diversity inclusion in our budget. I know it's a recommendation, it's not happening yet, but we'll talk about that later. But I just really wanted to thank you, because that is something that is a step in the right direction of how can we bring our community together. It's got to be through compassion, it's got to be through education, it's got to be through getting to know each other more, and we can't do that on $20,000 for the entire city. So I just really wanted to stop and just take a minute and say thank you. I know there'll be many more protests going forward, and it has a lot to do with hundreds of years of pain. And many people don't seem to understand that. I do not condone looting. I do not condone violence. So I will just, say that very clearly. But I do see and hear the rage that comes from so many people, of feeling that they are not seen, or feeling that people have to just run away just because of the color of their skin. And why would the percentage of melanin in our skin have anything to do with immediate fear? I just can't, I can't fully fathom it. So I just really wanted to say thank you for all of the allies, and knowing that we are going to try to continue to move forward together. Even though we've taken a few steps backwards, we will continue to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that.
Thanks, Erica.
Yeah, that was beautiful and appreciated. And on that note, I would invite people to, if you didn't get a chance today to watch the press conference, I have it on my Facebook page. The city has it on theirs. I've asked, I think we're going to get a YouTube link, so it's a little bit easy to share in different ways. I would encourage people to watch that. A lot of the details are fleshed out in that conversation. There's a lot of good information there. No doubt you will still have questions, and so please send those to all of us. But I would start with that press conference as a good anchoring point to get some more good information. One of the things that I shared at the press conference is that no doubt there's a ton of work to do. And locally, we have a lot of folks and organizations working on anti-racism work. And so one of the things that, if you're looking for something to do, and I hope you are, I would encourage you to educate yourself and do all the work that's necessary, and financially support some of these local organizations like Race Matters SLO County, the SLO County NAACP, and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at Cal Poly. And I'm sure there's many, many other groups as well out there locally and of course nationally that would really appreciate your support. So thank you for that, and thank you, Councilmember Stewart. And with that, we will move on to our public comment. This is for items that are not on the agenda. And City Clerk, do we have any speakers, please?
Mayor, before we do that, can we do the city attorney report out? I'm sorry, it wasn't on your script.
No problem, no problem. Thank you for that reminder. City Attorney, can you please report out on closed session?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. The council did meet in closed session on one item of conference with legal counsel on a matter of anticipated litigation that is related to both the FPPC complaint and the allegation of invalidity of the council's prior action, and also a letter from Saro Rizzo outlining a variety of legal issues or perceived legal issues related to the city's Clean Energy Choice program, and no reportable action was taken on that item. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you for that. And then now we will move on to public comment. And City Clerk, are there any speakers tonight on public comment?
Yes, so far we have one. Just
Okay.
one moment. Let me unmute Chris Rodebush. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Okay, your mic is unmuted. You may start.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council members. This is Chris Rodebush, and I am representing the We Are the Care initiative. First, want to start and thank you for your comments, Councilor Stewart and Mayor Harmon. Now more than ever, we are reminded that access to quality and affordable care is vital for our community to function and support our economy. We clearly see that childcare professionals are now and have always been an essential part of our workforce. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted and forever changed the life of every member in our community. Parents are no longer working under normal conditions, if at all, and children are no longer attending school or childcare centers in the traditional manner. We do not know for certain when our lives will return to normal, but we hold on to the knowledge that one day, someday we will go back to work and our children will go back to school. But according to a recent study by the National Association for Education of Young Children and the Center of American Progress, almost half of licensed child care centers and family child care homes are at risk of closing due to COVID-19. This will throw an already in crisis child care system into utter chaos. In order for our economy to get back on its feet, we need our child care providers. If we do not support the private sector of child care, many families will be unable to work when the time comes. We appreciate all that the City of San Luis Obispo has done to support this initiative in the first year and their support of a child care study, which is getting ready soon to launch. And we are also asking you to go one small step further in supporting early childhood and child care and appoint a member of this council or staff as a childcare liaison. Your childcare liaison will be our first point of contact, and we will hope to build a relationship with that individual so that together we can make great changes for the families and the workforce of San Luis Obispo community. We thank you for your support in our first year again and hope to continue to support us as we work together to solve the childcare crisis. If you'd like to learn more about the We Are the Care or to get involved, please contact First 5 San Luis Obispo County or find more information on our website, www.first5slo.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. City Clerk, are there no other speakers?
No, there are not.
Okay. Would anybody like to be the child care liaison to First 5?
Madam Mayor,
Yeah?
if I could just hop in here, maybe it might be helpful just to give you a bit of an update. We have Greg Avakian on the line today. He could give you an update of our, if you recall, we have a joint study underway with First 5, and we can give you an update and then also just share what we're doing on childcare and give you some little bit of context and background before we jump into the, because I know there's been a lot of liaison with Wendy Wendt and the rest of the team.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Just doing a mic check. Can you hear me okay? Great. Yeah, Greg Avakian, Director for Parks and Recreation. Yeah, we have our Youth Services Supervisor, Megan Berger, who's been working with Wendy Wendt at First 5 over the last, oh my goodness, 5 or 6 months based on the Child Care Initiative, and they're currently working on an RFP and doing interviews with consulting companies. I believe it's this week on Thursday, if I believe, with the committee, and also a packaged collaboration with Cal Poly, the county, the school district, and First Five. So currently our city liaison, official or unofficial, is Megan Berger with Parks and Recreation. And I think my recommendation would be for her to continue in that role, and we can provide additional updates based on your desires on the progress with that. But I believe we're really close to getting and selecting the consultant to do a childcare study for the entire county. In addition, the Parks and Rec Department is standing up their summer camps. We do registration this week, and they will begin on June 15th at our 3 school sites in collaboration with the San Luis Coastal Unified School District as well. So if you have any other questions, I'm happy to assist. And we also have some staff on the line that can provide some guidance as well.
Thank you for that update. I'm trying to, so there was nothing in that update though that suggests that none of us should be a liaison to this group, or is that you have that handled on some level, or?
Yeah, well, I guess it's your desire. We currently have a city representative working with First Five and CAPSLO and our county-wide group, and that is Megan Berger. If there's more desire to have additional representation, the more the merrier, of course, and we'd be happy to have a member of the council join us as well.
And how often does the group meet?
Sorry, you cut out again, Mayor Harmon.
How often does this group meet? Does anybody know?
It's not I don't think it's a set schedule. They've been meeting off and on because of the consulting project that they're doing an RFP for, and doing reviews and scheduling interviews for that. Okay. But I do know that Megan does work with Chris Rudebush, who was just on the public comment, and Wendy Went as well.
Okay, great. Well,
I'd probably defer to First Five on if they want to, what their expectation is for a monthly or bi-monthly meetings.
Okay, I see Councilmember Pease raising her hand a bit, but I'm happy to do it. I don't understand fully the commitment. I mean, as a former preschool teacher and all of that, so I don't know how that works. I'm sure they're still listening. Reach out to me personally and make sure that I know exactly what the expectation is and timing and all of that. I'm happy to help. I'll write myself a note. Andy, did you want to say something?
No, I just wanted, that sounds like a great approach. It sounds like having the staff be, Megan Berger be the set liaison to be able to kind of keep that professional connection, but to, I think you're a great fit with your professional background. So as things come up that require more council involvement, that would be awesome if you were the point on that.
Okay, great. Happy to do it. All right. Thank you, everybody. And now we will move on to the consent agenda. This is for items deemed to be non-controversial. Do we have any of my council members that would like to pull an item? City Clerk, do we have any public comment?
No, ma'am, we do not.
Okay, would someone like to make a motion?
Motion.
Oh, Councilmember Gomez, Vice Mayor Gomez?
Yeah, I'm happy to make a motion to move approval of the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Councilmember Christensen. City Clerk?
Councilmember Gomez, Vice Mayor Gomez?
Yes.
Councilmember Christensen?
Yes.
Councilmember Pease?
Yes.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yes.
Mayor Harmon?
Yes, and with that, it passes 5-0. And now we will move on to a public hearing of our 2019-21 financial plan supplement and our 2020-21 budget. And so Finance Director Bridget Elke and Budget Analyst Natalie Harnett will please present the report. And before we get started with staff, I was talking briefly with a couple of my colleagues, and I guess I'll just speak for myself and say that, as has been noted, this has been a very intense week, and I have read the staff reports and feel like I think I'm asking, I'm just contextualizing this and needing some patience and grace and in terms of question asking and things like that. And feeling a little bit less grounded, I would say, than usual for a city council meeting in terms of remembering all the information. So thank you on that. And with that, Ms. Elke, would you like to present the report?
And good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. It's actually your city manager, Derek Johnson, who will kick us off for the 2021 supplemental budget review. And so I'll hand it over to him before I will present part of the presentation, followed by your budget analyst, Natalie Harnett.
Great. Thanks, Brigitte, and Madam Mayor, members of the council. We are happy to be here tonight with the proposed 2021 supplemental budget. I do want to just thank the council and the community and everyone just giving us the grace for all the work that we have done on this budget. And so, Brigitte, I think you're operating the controls, or is it Teresa, if I could just have you run to the next slide. So we've got a number of recommendations tonight. The first one is to adopt the resolution, which will establish the appropriation limit for 2021 and the GAN limit. The second one to actually approve and appropriate the budget for the 2021 as the financial supplement, which is included as attachment C, which takes 5 separate different actions. I won't go through those in detail. And then the last, we've got members from our parking team to talk a little bit about some of the proposed changes with parking rate increases, and which require both a resolution and an ordinance. Next slide. So first and foremost, I do want to thank the team and all of the work and our community for all that they've done over the last 2.5 months. And we have clearly a lot of work ahead to do. There has been great progress on our challenges with COVID-19. I think ultimately the work that we've done over the numbers of years, focusing on our team development and work, prepared us to be able to adapt and be agile in the face of COVID-19 and other challenges which we've experienced just this week. We have had to live in a space and along with council, and I know that we've spent some time talking about just the challenges of operating a local government in the 21st century with the significant amount of unknowns. And I think it's helped our organization deal with effective and rapid response. You know, that's not to say, you know, we didn't make a significant amount of accomplishments in 1920, and we did. And we've had some historical challenges. We've had essentially 6 weeks to revise a budget supplement. Normally the budget supplement is only some minor tweaks, and yet this time we had to make major adjustments without the benefit and the typical feedback from the public, which usually is over 6 months or more to incorporate feedback into the scope of changes that are proposed as this part of this budget. And so we've positioned the city to be nimble. You know, state and local governments not only to manage the health crisis, but also the economic and the fiscal crisis. And they need to do that in light of drastic reductions in revenue. You know, there's somewhat of a paradox here. In times of economic challenge and fiscal constraint, we have surging demand for services. And then in this instance, we have to simply, in many instances, just for example, the childcare example, we have to restart our services and make sure they're safe for both the public, employees, and people who are going to use those programs. I am happy to say that we've prepared for this in a very intelligent way. And as the staff report outlines, we have over $20 million in reserves. And I say that as we don't know where we'll close out the current fiscal year just yet. And I am proud to say that we have proposed a balanced budget for the next year. We've also had to do a significant amount of work on our capital improvement program. And, this was one of the, the toughest parts because we literally, our journey to develop the CIP program as part of the financial plan began actually before my time as city manager. It was work on right sizing our local revenue measure in line with prior, the firm priorities of the Revenue Enhancement Oversight Committee, input we received from the community to achieve a goal of over 70% of funding towards CIP. And we had a lot of really innovative and transformative projects as part of our CIP. And so we've had to scale that back in light of new fiscal realities. I will say, and we're having conversations, and this is an item that we're preparing to come back to the council on July 21st, is that now more than ever, slow forward will be a significant part of our conversation about who we want to be and how are we going to transform the community. Otherwise, we are simply going to be pushing pause on the dreams and aspirations and the things that we want to achieve for our community. And I can say that what I've heard over the last week and what I've heard over the last couple of months is that status quo is not good enough. Status quo community is not where San Luis Obispo wants to be. We want to do better for a variety of reasons. We have service challenges that have come up in our feedback, and they're even more intense. We're doing things that we haven't had to do before. And we cannot address without slow forward, key issues like housing, climate change, transportation, downtown vitality, and fiscal health and sustainability. We have brought forward a rather ambitious approach, which is for a consolidated goal. What we've learned during COVID-19 is a stark reminder that communities are really not just about places; they're about people. It's what makes San Luis Obispo special. Sure, we're blessed by the natural and man-made beauty, but it's the people and the leadership that make it special. These people that live and work in our community and work in our organization that have helped us through these tough times and those tough times ahead. So hope is what we have right now. And I think as I set out with the council as we began COVID-19, hope is our oxygen. And we're going to make it through this. And we have a long way to go through teamwork, collaboration with other agencies. The dog is not a part of my presentation, but I love it. It's a great addition. I love that shot. And so as we get back into the presentation, I'll just jump into the next slide here. So I want to talk a little bit about the factors and phases of recovery. This is something, as the council knows, I spent a lot of time reading, and I just want to forecast and give a roadmap of where we are on this journey. So, pre-COVID, you can see where we were. There was an upward trajectory in the economy. We're now in the response phase. And, what this graphic really highlights is, the things that we have to do to work together as a community. We have to focus on essentials. We have to be flexible. Right now, the current COVID crisis and our work on diversity, equity, inclusion require us to work towards speed. And we have to we can restore and emerge stronger. I don't think that anyone here at the council or staff believes that we're going to return to the past normal, or that really is I think it's somewhat trite, but it's, people talk about the new normal. And I think we have an opportunity at this time to define what that is. We're going to have to offer higher flexibility. We're going to have to be, as I mentioned, more speedy in our response. And as we prepare for the next new normal, we're going to have to build long-term enhancements in the public sector, establish a better foundation and a more equitable foundation for the future, and then create that new level of flexibility. And a lot of this timetable, as Dr. Fauci points out, isn't really up to us. It's really the virus makes the timeline, not us. And so we're going to have to be flexible and nimble moving forward. Next slide. So one of the areas that I think, I've been really intrigued with is, is particularly spending time trying to look at public attitudes, is that a strong recovery is going to depend on societal attitudes, and the concerns and confidence, will go a long way. And so we're going to have a continued role for easing and helping people with fear, giving them accurate information about the disease. How are consumer responses going to be? What are the concerns going to be about social gatherings and about privacy, and how are we going to manage those issues? What is going to be the type of business activity? How is COVID-19 going to impact our community? We have a lot of young people who are in the employment and service sectors. And so how are they going to be impacted? And what does that mean for Cuesta, Cal Poly, and the students who rely upon that income to attend higher education? A lot of concerns around health, and we continue to work with the county on tracking, tracing, and testing. And we have the concern of reopening too soon, and we're juggling that right now. And this is going to be a constant struggle and a push-pull along the way. Next slide. So why a meta goal? And I want to just simply put, without economic health and activity, we can't support the quality of life, create equality, engage co-creators in building the just, equitable, verdant, and socially, environmentally, and economically prosperous community that we want. Many of you have heard me talk about Jim Collins and Good to Great for social sectors. He discusses the concept of a flywheel, which is once it gets going, it's got that momentum. Ever since, I heard him speak last fall, I've been brainstorming what is San Luis Obispo's flywheel. I don't suggest that, this model here is it, but it's certainly something that I think can be used to help us relay why it's so important to have economic activity, that it creates a thriving city region. It improves quality of life. It attracts people to our community who are co-creators, and then in turn it creates those economic activities. And right now, that our job is to get that flywheel moving again, so that it has the momentum. And we don't need to create the same wheel. We have an opportunity, as I've mentioned before, to do something different. And we can leverage the good work that we've already done in housing and climate action, sustainable transportation and sustainability. And it's my recommendation that the meta goal really combines that in a way that gives universal focus to our city organization. Next slide. So what is the process by which we'll be moving forward with the financial plan? The good news is that the number of new and confirmed cases of coronavirus in the United States, in the state and the county, at least for now, have peaked and appears to be leveling off, if not falling. Stay-at-home mandates across the states have been having their intended effect of limiting the spread of the virus beyond the initial surge, although there are certainly going to be spikes that we need to be monitor. Where we are far less cognizant, however, is what the full scope of the economic shock will be. Economic statistics significantly lag behind public health stats. There is some data for March and April that was distributed, but much of the month has passed before public health closures were widely mandated. Hence, they don't tell us much. May numbers are just arriving and will be closely monitored leading up to the October revise. So what does this graphic show? This really is the graphical representation of about how we've arrived at the revised financial plan and how we intend to move forward. So what we did is we took the 5 major city goals in the 19 to 21 financial plan. We looked at the COVID-19 economic and financial impacts and looked at what is going to be the necessary resources that we're going to need to have available to adapt and be able to respond to this ongoing public health and economic crisis. And then we combine that with the economic recovery and resiliency major city goal. And that merged together as your revised 2021 financial plan. So following today, I think it was very clear in the staff report that the next steps for us, and I just mentioned that previously, is to continue to do financial scenario modeling. We need to continue to reforecast and be actualizing what happened with the 1920 financial plan. How did we end up? And then we need to continue on focus on economic recovery and resiliency. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, Brigitte. That concludes the portion of my presentation, and then Brigitte and Natalie will take it from here.
Thank you very much, Derek. And can everybody hear me all right? Very good. Thank you very much. We'll continue on the presentation. You'll see at the very bottom of the slides the little roadmap that shows the topics that we'll be covering now. But in order to begin assessing where the budget is headed next year, we really must reflect on where we are departing from. 2020 will always be remembered as the year of COVID-19, but it's good to remember that for the city of San Luis Obispo, it was a lot more than just that. We started the fiscal year with an ambitious work program and a 2-year financial plan. And within the last 11 months, we've really gotten a lot done. 41% of our 2-year major city goal tasks have been completed or were implemented into operational procedures. And this does not include numerous tasks that are ongoing and will continue into the next year. Our engineering team has completed 20 infrastructure projects with many more in the making, such as the replacement of the Marsh Street Bridge. From a financial standpoint, the first half of the year marked 10 years of economic expansions. CalPERS announced just in January that it had reached an all-time high with 400 billion in assets, and the city was in a healthy financial position. With the 2019-21 financial plan, the city had embarked on the next phase of its financial health response plan, and we were preparing to make our second down payment in a bid to aggressively pay down the city's pension liability. So in short, life was actually good. Next slide, please. As just mentioned, this current fiscal year actually marks the second year of a 3-year financial health response plan to balance the city's long-term general fund forecast and set aside funding for a 115 trust fund to respond to further pension fluctuations. The city has met most of the plan's goals and is starting to see significant savings associated with employee concessions and pension reform. With those savings, the city had actually planned to make additional payments to CalPERS and establish the Section 115 Trust Fund. However, before that decision could be made at the 18-19 audit review, the COVID-19 pandemic began to rear its ugly face, and the council decided to keep the full undesignated amount and savings in fund balance in anticipation of revenue shortfalls and to assist with economic recovery. While this decision will give the city a safety net, it will undoubtedly alter the course of the fiscal health response plan. Assessing the current situation, we must keep in mind that the fiscal health response plan was a trifecta approach that also saw operating budget reductions, leaving department budgets with little wiggle room for additional adjustments without reducing service levels. Though it seems hard to depart from the plan and the course we embarked on just a mere year ago, allowing for this flexibility with the undesignated fund balance intact will serve the city well and will be reevaluated in October when the fiscal impact of the pandemic will be much better known. Next slide, please. So really, what just happened? Reflecting on it and shown in this chart, it feels like we fell off a revenue cliff. Due to the shelter-at-home directive and closure of most businesses, the city experienced losses in the order of magnitude that took 16 months to develop during the Great Recession. With COVID-19, it took a mere 3 months, and we expect that it won't recover to 2018-19 levels prior to 2023-24. This chart really illustrates where we expect revenues to land vis-a-vis expenditures a year ago and what we are predicting now. All in all, the city might have to do with an estimated 28 million in revenue loss over the next 5 years. Though this chart concentrates on the general fund, this crisis is not just taking a toll on tax income, such as sales and transient occupancy tax. As we will learn later in the presentation, COVID-19 is affecting all city funds, including water, sewer, parking, and transit. We have to keep in mind that this picture was painted based on scenario modeling and multiple assumptions, which further illustrates the need to reassess in a few months. The current revenue budget assumes that the shelter-at-home directive will end on May 31st. That's a check mark. Phased reopening of business activities, we're starting to see that. Schools will return in fall 2020. That is still a question mark. COVID-19 was felt by most industry, and that holds true most certainly. We recover from the shock in what is known as a U-shaped recovery. So a gradual return to revenue levels that we've seen previous to COVID-19. To further stress the severity of the situation, really, the picture does not take into account additional losses that might be seen with CalPERS pension system. We do not know yet with what return on investment CalPERS will end the year, and we most certainly hope that they can regain some of the losses as we march towards the end of the fiscal year on June 30th. The city, however, will not feel that result until the year 22-23. Late breaking news, the received first quarter sales tax remittance seems to indicate that we are likely not too far off with our assessments, and that's at least for now. Next slide, please. And yet, the only constant in life seems to be change. The true impact on 1920 financials will not be known until August, when the city closes its books and second quarter sales tax, including the postponed first quarter remittances, have been received. A lot comes down to how we will end this fiscal year to determine our resources going forward. And based on what we know, we assess where the city might end its current fiscal year. With an estimated $5.8 million shortfall from the original adopted budget, 2019-20 will likely end with a negative position, despite the anticipated $2.7 million in expenditure savings. The city acted quickly to reduce its expenditure while still providing essential services during and responding to the pandemic and health emergency. The original adopted budget assumed we would end in a positive position with about $1.6 million in revenue above expenditure. This money will then have been appropriated by the City Council for one-time use, such as an additional payment to pension obligations. Given what we know now, the city will likely end the fiscal year about $1 million in the negative, having to draw from its fund balance. Next slide, please. Where does that leave us, and where do we find ourselves now that the state, the county, and the city are gradually coming out of the shelter-at-home directive that lasted 9 weeks and told much of the city's economy? The city is fortunate to have adopted solid and well-thought-out policy frameworks. The immediate activation of the fiscal health contingency plan across all funds includes a hiring, purchasing, and travel chill. Additionally, almost 200 temporary employees have been furloughed due to programs and services closing in mid-March. Staff has developed multiple financial models that give us the insight on what to expect, including the eventuality of Cal Poly not returning in the fall, the second wave leading to another shutdown. Lastly, as mentioned before, the city has healthy reserve levels in place for all of its funds. The general fund has about $20 million available, with $11 million being its emergency reserves as mandated by policy. This will provide a much needed safety net as we embark on uncharted territory and reopen the city. As we will see later in the presentation, the city's enterprise funds have equally healthy reserves and fund balances to withstand the current crisis, at the very least in the short term. Next slide, please. And despite all of that, staff has an obligation to present to the City Council a balanced budget for consideration and approval. We had to do so with the intelligence gained through our revenue scenarios, assumptions on the recovery, and external factors largely unknown at this point. The development of the budget supplement was already underway when the shelter-at-home order started to take effect, and staff had to assess and respond in a very tight time frame, while also responding to ongoing emergency conditions. We therefore acted swiftly by freezing the budget for 2020-21 at current fiscal year levels. We took a critical look at our capital improvement plan to reprioritize projects considered for funding. We developed a retirement incentive program and reworked the Major City Goal program to address the emerging community needs. Based on all the assumptions and expenditure realignments, we present tonight a balanced budget. However, much remains unknown. Most of all, how consumers, the community, the businesses will react and recover confidence into the summer months and the rest of this calendar year. Changing priorities have emerged and necessitate the city to assist the community in its own organization in the recovery stages ahead. Next slide, please. With the 2019-21 financial plan, the City Council adopted the strategic plan around 5 major city goals. Much has been achieved during the current fiscal year in advancing the work programs connected to those goals. However, COVID-19 now requires a new approach, concentrating on safely reopening San Luis Obispo and supporting residents, partners, the community, and our organization in economic recovery. This graphic shows how the morphing of the 2019-21 strategy into a unified goal provides the structure and framework to guide resources allocations, as well as actions in decision-making by all the city departments. This effort is supported by guiding principles, including the city's core values of civility, sustainability, diversity, inclusivity, regionalism, partnership, and resiliency, as well as the activation of the fiscal health contingency plan. Focus on communication of the city's roles and responsibilities, as well as information and data as it is known regarding our financial recovery. Continue partnerships regionally and with key partners such as Cal Poly, the Chamber of Commerce, REACH, and Downtown SLO. Next slide, please. The reason for turning to one goal is to allow staff to continue to provide essential services while reopening facilities and services with a focus on outcomes. It will allow the city as an organization to focus on the shared vision of economic stability, recovery, and resiliency, and to prioritize related activities and maximize the impacts. All departments will be involved in this team effort and collaboration, new ways of doing business, efficiency, and thoughtful reorganization in pursuit of a shared vision that will assist the community and organization to charge the way out of the health crisis and emergency. Next slide, please. The proposed focus goal of economic stability, recovery, and resiliency is supported by 10 strategies outlined on this slide. These 10 strategies have tactics and actions associated to achieve them. All of the strategies are supportive of the 5 major city goals and remain committed to the original vision and intent. Significant progress has been made on those 5 major city goals, and many objectives of those goals will continue in support of the focused economic recovery. A few examples. Under community, a tactic is to prioritize childcare provided by the city in support of residents' return to work. We are registering children for summer programs K through 6 at multiple sites in compliance with state guidelines. Another one is under business. We are implementing strategy to help businesses with programs such as the Shop Slow promotion. And with that, I'm actually turning it over to your budget analyst, Natalie Hurnett, to take you through the next slides, moving through the general fund, the enterprise funds, the capital project plan, and then it will turn back to me for the final slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Brigitte. Can everyone hear me? Okay, perfect. All right, so first we're going to take a look at the general fund. This graph gives a good overview. The two columns represent one for revenues and one for expenditures. In a balanced budget, expenditures need to be equal to or less than the revenues. Based on what we know now, projected revenues will be about $8.6 million lower than the original projection of about $78 million, bringing the new total to about $70 million. In order to produce a balanced budget, expenditures will need to be reduced to at least that amount. The city was able to make $5.85 million in reductions. The largest reduction was in staffing. This is a result of freezing vacant positions and recalculating the staffing costs for next year. This recalculation process is done for every supplemental budget and involves looking at each individual employee's forecasted step increases, their benefits, and their healthcare plans for the following year. A year and a half ago, when the financial plan was originally created, many employees were at higher steps or in different benefit tiers. The fiscal health response plan tactics have lowered these costs significantly. By truing up the costs, the city was able to reduce the budget by almost $3 million. The other reductions were from reduced insurance costs, CPI reductions, which we'll go over later, and other miscellaneous reductions as shown on page 69 of the packet. So the end result, that black line there, is basically just showing that we do have a balanced budget for the time being. Things may change, but that is what we're presenting today. Okay, so taking a little closer look at the general fund, this table is our expenditures. It can also be found on page 62. Overall expenditures were lowered by about 8%, the majority of which was from operating expenditures. Capital was decreased by 23%. Most of this was the local revenue measure funding, which due to COVID has a projected revenue decrease of about $739,000 for next year. The transfers row is a combination of a few things. So this includes transfers into and out of the general fund. This line item decreased because, first of all, the insurance costs are transferred into an insurance fund and paid out of there. So that cost was decreased significantly. Additionally, there was a significant reduction in our gas tax revenue, which is reflected as a transfer into the general fund from the gas tax fund. This next table takes a closer look at the changes in financial position for general fund revenues. Sales tax and transient occupancy tax are most severely impacted. This year, hotel occupancy rates in April hovered around 18%, which is a more than 75% reduction from the prior year. Depending on how the phased reopening plays out and how the economy recovers, like Brigitte mentioned before, it could take several years for all of these revenues to return to pre-COVID levels. Cannabis projections were also significantly lowered due to delayed store openings and also overly optimistic original forecasts. Fees for service these are hard to forecast due to the lingering unknown, but based off of staff projections, fee revenue will decrease by about 10%. Many of those fees, like in Parks and Rec, will depend on when programs can fully reopen and when services will resume to normal. Overall, the general fund is expecting about an 11% decrease in revenue for fiscal year 21. Oops. All right, next we'll look at the water and sewer funds. These are primarily funded by utility rates. These funds have seen an impact from COVID-19 due to the shelter-in-place order. Cal Poly closed in March, which will impact both on-campus water usage, use in residential areas, and businesses that are frequented by Cal Poly students.
Pardon me.
Mhm.
Sorry to interrupt. Okay, I was looking for Vice Mayor Gomez, and there he is. Continue.
Is everyone there?
I think so, yes. We lost
Okay.
Aaron. So he's here.
Okay, let me know if I need to go back.
Yeah, thank you.
So Cal Poly closure, another factor is the residential usage from those staying at home and that live in the city. All of these impacts, along with unpaid bills, the city has never dealt with these circumstances before, and is just starting to gather enough data from April and May to see what the true impact on our utilities will be. At this time, the estimated revenue reduction will be about $2.1 million in the water fund and $1.4 million in the sewer fund. In an effort to support the local economic recovery, the department is proposing to defer previously approved water and sewer rates, rate increases, and it is also proposing to suspend the industrial user permits class 1 and 2, which will affect about 300 local businesses. This permit revenue totals about $70,000 to $80,000 annually. This next table is the water fund long-term forecast. If you focus on the red box at the bottom, the decrease in revenue projections is a combination of both a $1 million from decreased consumption and about $1.1 million from decreased or deferred rate increases. The shortfalls assume a rate increase is deferred for the entire year. Staff will return with a recommendation whether to defer for the entire year or less than that when we come back in October. So this table helps highlight the impact on the overall long-term unreserved working capital. If the current assumptions hold true, the unreserved working capital will be about $6.7 million in 2024-25. The fund should maintain an unreserved working capital balance between 10 to 15 million. So it's lower than it should be. The long-term forecast assumptions will need to be reevaluated once the city has more clarity about the future and the impact from COVID-19. Next, we have the changes in financial position for the sewer fund. There is an estimated $830,000 shortfall from deferred rate increases and an additional $570,000 shortfall from decreased usage. This totals about $1.4 million for the sewer fund. The sewer fund is in a better position than the water fund because it has accrued a larger than normal unreserved working capital balance to help manage the cash flow associated with the wharf upgrade project. The intent is to lower the unreserved working capital balance when the project is complete, but fortunately it does have additional unreserved working capital. The Utilities Department is proposing a handful of significant operating budget changes, also known as SOBCs. All of these are considered mission critical and have funding identified. The first item is budget for liquid oxygen, which is the new primary disinfectant at the water treatment plant. The second is for stormwater changes that will reorganize the supervisory roles of the program. DigiSmart, I'm sorry if I said that wrong, is a software program that will facilitate compliance with AB 1166. And more importantly, it will assist with ensuring worker safety and protecting underground infrastructure. The fourth proposal is to permanently create the solid waste coordinator position, which is a position that we currently have and is filled on an interim basis. Lastly is an SOBC to fund the interim deputy director for an additional year. This position is currently managing the wharf upgrade project and is very important for ongoing work. Next, we'll review the parking fund. The parking division is uniquely impacted by COVID-19 because it can play a key role in economic recovery. The anticipated revenue shortfall is approximately $2.6 million for this current year and $3.3 million for next year. A large part of this is due to economic recovery efforts such as designated curbside pickup zones and decreased parking enforcement. The intent is that while there will be revenue losses, these decisions will help our local businesses and community recover more quickly. The parking fund will continue the final design work for the Palm Napomo structure and will maintain the project in shovel-ready status until the fund is stabilized from COVID-19. In doing this, it will be able to maintain its operating reserve and cover all the current debt obligations. This is a graphic that helps outline where the revenue shortfall is coming from. The biggest factors are the loss from metered parking and structure usage downtown. Reduced enforcement, deferred rate increases, and other shortfalls make up the remainder of the $3.2 million. These shortfalls are under the assumption that economic recovery actions take place until January 1st, 2021. This too may be reevaluated in the fall. For the parking fund, revenue shortfalls are offset partially by operating reductions. So in this graph, you'll see the orange line is operating expenditures, and they were reduced, but this alone is not enough to create a balanced budget. So the fund will be making use of unreserved working capital. Fortunately, over the recent years, the parking fund has been building its fund balance in order to pay as much cash as possible towards the Palm Napomo structure. The rest will be debt financed, but due to this, the parking fund has built up about $12.2 million in unreserved capital. This graph does not include the cost of construction for Palm Napomo, which is about $29 million. At this time, the city is moving forward with the design elements for the project and will break ground when the time is right. But construction is not expected to start next year. Staff will continue to monitor the bond market and report back to council in October. The parking division is putting forth several efforts to support economic recovery, such as deferred rate increases, curbside pickup zones, free structure validation, and reduction in certain enforcement areas. It also will be focusing on community outreach and working with customers and local businesses. The parking division is using COVID-19 as a unique opportunity to rapidly reshape its operations. The path forward includes an emphasis on customer service and technology, which will help improve the way the community accesses the city. The transition to mobile apps and pay stations will help parking utilize personnel more efficiently and also create a frictionless parking experience, meaning no need to touch parking meters or exchange payments. Frictionless parking is not only reduces the physical interactions a customer will need to have, which is so important now with the pandemic, but it also helps with the overall experience. For example, allowing customers to add time to a parking session without rushing out of lunch to put more money on the meter. Oh, I'm sorry, there was one more item I had here. Additional technologies also include the automated license plate recognition, which can reduce lines, congestion, and increase the ease of use on our roadways and parking structures. This is a much more sustainable and customer serviced approach that will improve community safety in the long run. Okay. Along with our other enterprise funds, COVID-19 will undoubtedly impact our transit program, but the challenges are largely mitigated by the actions already taken in response to the pandemic and from the infusion of the CARES Act funding. Ridership has significantly decreased due to COVID-19, and the effects are expected to continue into next year. Our transit division has taken the time to create an improved environment for physical distancing on the buses for those individuals that are taking essential trips on the city's transit vehicles. In fiscal year 2021, the transit program will be less dependent on its historic transit funding sources like the Transportation Development Act funding and farebox revenue. The CARES Act funding will actually pay for 100% of the program's operating costs, and the fund plans to use fund balance to put towards much needed replacement of 2 of the program's oldest transit vehicles with electric versions. Our next section is an overview of the capital improvement plan, which Derek mentioned has been carefully reevaluated amid the economic crisis and was a huge workload. The overarching goal for the CIP moving forward is threefold. The first goal is to adjust the capital expenditures in response to the projected revenue shortfall. The second is to align the adjusted CIP program with a focus on economic recovery and consistency with the major city goals. The third is to leverage opportunity to support long-term community sustainability and vibrancy. For example, the downtown parklets. So I'm going to take you through this little flow chart. The first question we ask is the project critical to public health and safety, or is it essential to maintenance? If yes, then it will need to proceed. The second question is, does the project strongly support economic recovery? If yes, then it will need to proceed. If not, then it's deferred. The next question is, for all other projects, does it support a major city goal, or does it provide an opportunity for positive transformation? If yes, then it will proceed. If no, it will defer. And does that project support economic recovery? Oh, I'm sorry, that step was before. If it supports economic recovery, then it will proceed. And these are all on top of an overarching foundation of fiscal responsibility. Projects were then placed into a category. 45 projects were deferred for the time being, such as the Laguna Lake dredging and some fleet vehicle replacements. Most projects continued forward with a supplemental budget, and 27 new projects were brought to the table. These new projects were deemed important for economic recovery and will be funded by the reallocation from other projects. This slide summarizes the quantity of the deferred projects and the new recommended projects for the CIP. When looking at CIP budget as a whole, it is very hard to see the scale of changes because the numbers are simply so large. This table provides a look at the CIP budget change for each fund. General fund, CIP funds, so capital outlay, local revenue measure, those all have decreased by about 10 to 15%. And SB1, which is our funding that we get, it's a gas tax essentially, was lowered about 40%, and that is due to a decrease in the projected revenues for next year. As mentioned in the prior section, Transit Fund plans to replace several of its vehicles, contributing to a 94% increase in that fund. And our water and sewer funds include the monumental wharf upgrade, along with several other large projects. Overall, the CIP budget has decreased by about 1%. Over the last year, our engineering team has completed substantial work, with 20 projects completed this current fiscal year and upcoming work that isn't slowing down. Key projects include the El Capitan Bridge replacement and the Meadow Park pedestrian bridge replacements. These replace and enhance pedestrian pathway connections. Upcoming work includes full demolition and replacement of the Marsh Street Bridge and the summer paving projects, which will maintain asphalt condition as well as enhance safety and bikeway connections via new pavement striping through the outer downtown areas. A big thank you again to our CIP team and all of their hard work on this budget. I'm going to hand the presentation back over to Brigitte, our finance director.
Thank you very much, Natalie, and I assume you can all still hear me. Very good, thank you. Bear with me as we round out the presentation with some of the other recommendations that are before you tonight. Each year or each fiscal year, the city actually has to adopt the city's appropriation limit in accordance with California Proposition 4 as amended in 1990 through Proposition 111. The proposition is probably better known as the GON limit and establishes the ceiling on the proceeds of taxes that may be appropriated for spending in a given fiscal year. The limit follows a prescribed calculation, which amounts for this next fiscal year to about $75 million. And the amount subject to the appropriation within the budget presented to you tonight is about $48 million, well under that calculated limit. And the recommendation is for you to approve the 2021 appropriation limit. Next slide, please. We are asking the City Council to delegate authority to the City Manager to proceed with a limited duration voluntary retirement incentive program, subject to meet and confer with our represented employees. Voluntary retirement incentive programs are used generally to encourage turnover that allows the organization to either replace at lower salary and benefit levels, to restructure based on changing needs, or to consider thoughtful reorganizations. Conservative estimates regarding the length of a vacancy following retirement and level at which a position may be filled indicate that the program should save approximately $50,000 in the first fiscal year and result in approximately $295,000 in ongoing savings. Next slide, please. Also before you tonight is the city's master fee schedule that sets forth all applicable fees for services. It has been established according to the city's cost recovery goals as set forth in the city's financial policies. Between the years when the city updates the fees via an in-depth fee study, the schedule is updated via the Consumer Price Index based on Los Angeles Riverside and the Construction Cost Index for impacts fees. Since the last study in 2017 did not incorporate the cost of credit card fees that are carried in each department's expenditure budget, staff is with this update incorporating those changes with this year's update. The schedule is now ready for council adoption and approval. And next slide, please. And that's really the conclusion of tonight's presentation. And the supplemental budget is most certainly anything but the norm for a second year of a financial plan. It took a lot of creative thinking, swift action, and tremendous foresight to present a balanced budget that still upholds the city's core mission, provides for a dedicated major city goal work program, achieves a lot of important capital projects, and acknowledges the challenges the community faces. I would like to thank your budget analyst, Natalie, for a tremendous job for not only putting that budget together, but doing so amidst revenue scenarios, Cal Poly impact assessments, and cash flow modeling. Our thank also goes equally to all our colleagues who have worked hard to make this budget a reality, and the leadership team for the unwavering support and encouragement. All department heads and program managers are available tonight to address any questions. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you again to your entire team. This must have been, obviously this is an unprecedented situation, and I'm sure it has just taken epic amounts of work behind the scenes. And so thank you everybody involved for coming up with this. I don't know if this is true for all my colleagues here, but I know it's true for me, and I think it's true for most, that we've all also had some fairly in-depth conversations before this meeting with staff. So sometimes we ask a ton of questions, and sometimes we don't ask as many questions because we've had a lot of time to, because this is such a big item. I know most or all of us have had a lot of in-depth conversations with staff already. So just want to contextualize that a little bit. Do my colleagues have some questions right now? Councilmember Pease.
Thank you so much. And yes, I do appreciate the time in advance that staff did spend with us, and just congratulations on a balanced budget. I just have a couple of questions. First on some of the couple of CIP items that I'm hoping could be explained. The first is that project that didn't make the cut, which is about recycling at parks. So I'd like to understand that a little bit better. And then also on the Laguna Lake dredging, there was some concern about the length of time for the permit. And I'm wondering if you can just clarify if we get that extended so that once we start, we get the full 5 years or whatever the permit covers.
Great. Thanks, Councilmember Pease. I'll ask Bob Hill to address the length of the permits, and then ask Mr. Horn, who just by way of note was today, probably missed him in all your emails. We announced him as our new Public Works Director for the City of San Luis Obispo. So there will be a formal announcement coming, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to recognize him. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bob Hill.
Thank you, Derek, and good evening, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great. I just wanted to address the comment from Councilmember Pease about Laguna Lake and our permitting. As Council and I think most everyone in the community has been aware, we've been on a long journey to plan, design, and engineer and permit the Laguna Lake dredging and sediment project for, well, as long as I've worked for the city, which has been over 7 years. We did just recently fully permit all the regulatory permits, state, federal permits this past season, and so we would have been ready to go with the project. However, given the COVID-19 circumstances, certainly it's not prudent to move forward right now. That being said, the permits that we applied for are 5-year permits. We didn't quite get ready to start last year, and we won't this year, so we're missing the first 2 years. So as staff, we're certainly happy to take direction and would do so anyway, to seek extension of those permits during the COVID crisis, and see if we can still have the same full 5 years that we had been authorized to conduct that work. We certainly always anticipated and communicated with those agencies that we wanted to do ostensibly 5-year revolving permits. We would do a 5-year permit, and that we would continue to be able to do the maintenance dredging project over time, even beyond 5 years. So we'll be happy to follow up with that direction if that's the council's desire.
Great.
Oh, hello, I'm Matt Horn, I guess Public Works Director. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Wonderful. I'm thinking back to the mid-year budget in which we put in a significant operating budget change that would provide for staffing and cans for recycling in our park system. I believe that was approved in the mid-year budget, but due to COVID-19, that money all went into a holding account. So we did not make a recommendation to move it forward with the supplement budget because we were taking so many other cuts in so many different areas. We didn't feel like it was appropriate to provide an additional new level of service when we were defunding other areas.
Okay, so does that mean there's kind of, then it will stay the status quo as it is right now in terms of a little bit of recycling, but not really a cohesive way, or there'll still be blue bins. It just won't have the kind of the look of and permanence.
The original budget request included some additional staff time to actually be able to pick up the recycling and keep it separated out. We have done our best to separate out some trash cans with recycling and have the trash company pick that up for us. So it's a bit of a makeshift program right now. Obviously staff is very interested in getting that program up and running. But again, with just the unknowns of COVID-19 and what our future budgets look like, we just didn't feel like it was appropriate to make that recommendation to council this evening.
All right, thank you. And for my colleagues, looks like it's a $40,000 line item for that one. Okay, thank you. And congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and then a question on parking. I'm super excited about the vision for the downtown, and so, and if you could just confirm that it sounds like the parking increasing, whether enforcement and fees and all of that is kind of going to go on cruise control in terms of once there's enough parking demand that would warrant more enforcement of the meters, then that will kick in automatically. There doesn't need to be any other council action. And then kind of the similar question of the new awesome technology for the meters. Sounds like that all gets to go forward with this. And then just what is the timing for implementation for those technologies?
Great question, Councilmember Pease. I think it would be important, and we've got Gavin Hussey joining us today, our new parking manager, who I just got to give a huge shout out, stepped up in a huge way over the last few months. So grateful for him and the rest of his team. And talk a little bit about the vision, the ideas. If you recall, back in November 2018, we had kind of I think a blue sky conversation about the future of parking, which was going to parlay into an update of our downtown concept, downtown access and management plan. That's on the horizon. We feel, though, that at this point in time, that there's an opportunity to, take back some of the right-of-way landscape and restore it for peds and bikes. So I'll turn it over to Gavin. He can answer the two questions, but this is meant to be switching investments that we had planned in a more, I think, intelligent way.
Hi, good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. So thanks for having me tonight. The long-term goal of our department is to improve the way the customers get to access and choose how they access our community. So whether they want to access it by foot, or whether they choose to bike in or use a bike share program or a ride share program or a vehicle, which is helpful for us, those are the things we want to encourage. They get to choose how they access us. The hope is by bringing the new technology to our city, we get to increase the way that people choose how they access us. The one major thing I want to say is that we are hoping to have this to our city by the fall. We will be coming back to council in July, I believe it's July 7th, with our recommendations for which technologies we'll be implementing. So that is the hope. Currently, we are not charging for parking at any of the meters or the structures. That will continue until we reach 50% occupancy, at which time we will increase charges at the 2-hour meters, the 10-hour meters, and the parking structures will have limited time available in them. And we will continue with 100% validation for customers in the downtown area.
Awesome. Well, that's great. And it seems like it's already filling up in a good way. And so I would imagine that there's going to be a little bit of a rolling implementation on enforcement possibly. So, but leave that to the professional judgment.
Yes, and it will be based. You're welcome.
Sorry, you can finish your sentence.
Yeah, so it'll be based on usage, and then a lot of this is going to have to do with communication. We want to make sure that we're communicating properly with our community and the businesses in downtown, so we're not trying to rush something overnight and get it out there too soon. So the time that we're offering to customers will be extensive, plus the notice time on top of that.
Great, thanks. I saw the flyer coming out, was that yesterday or today, that kind of clarified where everything is at right now. So very helpful. All right, thank you. And then my last question is a little bit bigger context in terms of the strategic plan for the implementation and the strategies themselves. We've certainly had a lot of awareness in the last few days about economic inequality and injustices for marginalized communities. And I think that we need to recognize that the inequality that's embedded in our system and culture, and that our post-COVID-19 recovery can't follow the old rules or the current rules for who are the winners and potentially, as we see, the losers in an economy. So we can't go by those old rules and expect different outcomes. So I'm hoping that we can take a couple of steps. I know that the mayor has a specific proposal about an allocation of funds that I'll let her talk about. And I would certainly support that. And the piece that I'd like to add is there's guiding principles in the agenda packet that talk about community and supporting a lot of those economic principles that Derek was talking about. And I'd like to this will be a question, but I'd like to introduce it now and then get staff response to see how this might be integrated. So, colleagues hearing this for the first time, but the language might be after the 7 or whatever order we want, an 8th guiding principle. The city recognizes that social and economic inequality is embedded in our system and culture, and that recovery must integrate deep structural transition to support the well-being and empowerment of marginalized communities. I think there's some specific strategies that could go along with that in terms of even how we do recruiting as a community, how we talk about living wages, how we utilize our community choice energy to leverage kind of equity-centric programs, et cetera. I don't think we need to go into the specifics of that, but I guess, obviously if my colleagues agree to that, which we can talk about during deliberation, but I did send this ahead of time, and I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on how this could be incorporated.
Thank you, Councilmember Pease. I'm going to ask Shelley to chime in just for purposes of just helping the other council members and the public navigate. Councilmember Pease is looking at roughly packet page 40 of the financial plan. It's the 8th strategy she pointed out. Annie, I just want to make sure I'm pointing everyone in the right direction. And so I think that's where you were intending to have that land if I'm following you.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just chime in just because we were kind of specific, and I think Councilmember Pease has suggested it be the 8th guiding principle, which really provides the foundation for the strategies. And then
it's the page 30 in the packet.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
page 30. Yeah.
Sorry, page 30.
And so just for context, those guiding principles are intended to really provide the foundation by which staff focuses on this unified meta goal. And then all of the 10 strategies that follow the guiding principles can readily...
I'm sorry, you guys, I got, a packet page and the separate budget supplement, and I don't really know what you're talking about because I haven't read any of the 1,000 emails we got, and so I don't know what you're talking about. So can you please... get me
Yep.
back to wherever we're supposed to be.
Yeah,
Tell me,
Carolyn,
tell me which packet you're talking about,
Yeah.
whether it's, thank you.
yeah, we're going to bring it up on the page here so we can, yep. And my apologies, I got the wrong page reference.
So it's the supplemental budget one that came first, so not the regular budget agenda, or not the regular agenda, and then page
Right.
30. It starts on 30, goes to 31, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. So 10 economic recovery strategies. Oops.
If you
Page
scroll
31.
page
It starts on
29.
Okay, yeah. So yes, so
all right,
it
okay,
starts
all
on,
right.
yeah,
I found
29.
it. Thank
yeah.
you.
Sorry.
Yeah, so when you're looking at page 29, and perhaps we could just scroll to that really quickly, that articulates the guiding principles of the meta goal right there. And then this would be added on page 30 as a number 8, and the language Councilmember Pease was proposing is something along the lines of the city recognizing that social and economic inequity is embedded in our systems and culture, and that recovery must integrate deep structural transition to support the well-being and empowerment of marginalized communities. What that principle would do is it would further provide foundation for then, as we scroll down to page 30, 31, the focus goal and the 10 economic recovery strategies. And we as staff could readily articulate and identify tactics and actions under those strategies which are supportive of that guiding principle, which could include, as Councilmember Pease forwarded to staff, a strategy such as prioritizing businesses and sectors that provide a living wage and head of household potential. Working with the CCA to leverage equity-centric programs that could readily fall under most of the strategies and be action supportive of those. And then with regard to recruitment of staff and working closely with communities and universities with diverse ethnic and racial backgrounds, that would fit under as an action under city organization.
And that's also, there was sorry to interrupt, that's also, it was, there was language in there about recruiting businesses.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so we can readily expand this, and the strategies will have multiple actions underneath them. We'll be reporting to you regularly on those and letting you know how we are addressing them. And of note, all city departments will be focused on these economic recovery activities and the foundational principles that you provide as guidance.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Those are all my questions.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Pease. Councilmember Stewart.
Can I just ask a question to clarify, Councilmember Pease? So are you thinking that that would help with resources as well? So like encouraging businesses that provide services and resources for people of different racial, ethnic, and religious ability backgrounds that are not here currently would kind of be founded in that principle as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm happy. Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to try to modify that language. Obviously, if I could have, I would have sent it out ahead of time so we could wordsmith it. I don't think it's necessarily just right. But anyway, yes, that is the idea.
Great. Thank you. No, that's wonderful. And I really just I have more, I guess, thank yous than questions, so I hope that's okay. Really, when I was reading through this whole packet of budget, not the board packet, but the council packet, but just really kind of stopped and was amazed at remembering how much we've already done, because honestly, the world kind of stopped at COVID and feels as though everything with coronavirus has kind of taken over, and really just wanted to say thank you to all of the staff and all of the hard work that's been done, because the accomplishments we've had from 19 to 20 through before COVID were amazing. And then how everyone's worked through COVID has also been amazing. So I guess I just really wanted to kind of just stop and take a moment to say thank you on that. I was a little bit, well, and also I really wanted to thank the staff, Mayor Harmon, as you said, so many questions were answered previous and even today. Public Works Director Matt Horn brought some great humor with our discussion and a lot of patience as I asked some unique questions, I guess. The one thing I'm curious about that I don't know how to really pose the question is probably for Monica Irons and Derek and Shelley is, I'm thrilled by the idea of course, savings for early retirement for people who want to take early retirement, but also knowing that when those who retire, they take with them all that intellectual capital and we lose a great deal. And I think it was Public Works alone that has 40% of people ready to retire if they want to. So how will we kind of take that knowledge and continue utilizing all of that expertise without those individuals?
Great question, Councilmember Stewart. And I'm just going to hand it over to Monica, who's, she's worked with these programs in the past and has some experience, and we can talk a little bit about knowledge transfer.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I'm seeing head nods. I miss all of you. It is a fantastic question, and the concept of knowledge transfer is something that the city has invested quite a bit of time in over the last, I would say, probably 5 years, including training supervisors and employees on how to effectively transition people into retirement. The nice thing about retirement, and even with these incentives and having windows that are fairly near term, is that we do have a heads up and we do have more than 2 weeks to start working through. And what I expect to happen through this program, what happened in 2009, is it encouraged those that have been thinking about it for some time. It isn't an early retirement incentive. These are people who are eligible for retirement. They are of retirement age. Many of them have worked beyond normal retirement age. And so chances are they've already been doing that and mentoring successors and working with supervisors on documenting work practices. So I think it actually positions us better than typical turnover in an organization that oftentimes is unanticipated.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I appreciate that.
But there is no doubt that we will, that you lose that historic perspective. But the rest who remain tend to really take the time to try and tap into that and transition and transfer as much of that knowledge as possible.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And back to the parking question, I think I missed one more thing. As far as the analyzing and then go ahead and moving forward when it's time to put in using the meters or using the electronic machine, will that be done before October or after October? Or is that kind of play it by ear as we figure it out?
This is Gavin again. It's kind of play it by ear, unfortunately. We're going to really have to assess what the occupancy levels are around the city, how frequent that is. So we're going to do several weeks of sustained levels of occupancy before we decide to start implementing our notice pattern to tell businesses and customers that we will be going back to payment.
Great, thank you. And I also really appreciate the orange parking meter concept for the curbside and pickup, still to encourage people to still utilize our restaurants, but yet still be safe with COVID. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Yep.
All right, that's the last of my questions and comments.
Councilmember Christensen?
Yeah, thank you. This is kind of more along the lines of Councilmember Stewart. I just want to make a couple comments, and I just had one kind of meta question at the end. I also, congratulations, Matt. I'm glad that was mentioned. Would have missed that one. And I know you'll do a great job. And thank you so much to staff for all the work that we can see in the documents here. As our mayor and others have mentioned, we had a chance to kind of go over this with staff on some of the just kind of understanding the basics, and I think it's just amazing amount of wonderful work, and the detail and the kind of putting it all together to try to get our major city goals accomplished at the same time, dealing with total unknowns in so many areas, as well as just making sure that that we're paying attention to the fact that we have no idea what's happening economically, except that we know that it's an economic disaster for so many. And so anyway, I appreciate that work, and I think you did a great job. And I hope that it sounds kind of crazy after a week like we've had, but maybe someday soon you'll get a break and have a chance to take a day or two off. That would be nice. But my question actually is kind of along the lines of Councilmember Stewart's about parking, except it's about the water and wastewater fees. And I know, we've talked about this before, how essential water, clean water is to not only, just living, but we have some legal obligations and some other issues involved with making sure our water and wastewater is up to snuff. And what's the timeline for? I know we had fee increases that were to help pay for the WRF and keep that fund whole. What's the plan for going back to our original budget on things like their fees and those kinds of things that were already set and then now they're deferred? How long will they be deferred? Is that for a year, or are we going to be seeing that in October? What's the plan there?
Great question, Councilmember Christensen. And this is, a topic of conversation we've had, because not only do we have to make sure that the fund remains solvent, that we have the operating reserves that are consistent with our financial policies, but also we have, in many instances, we've, borrowed to build infrastructure and capital improvements. So we have debt ratio requirements. So I'm going to ask Mr. Floyd to talk a little bit about the rationale and reasoning and the time and the timetable which we estimate coming back to the council. I think we're, staff, we're certainly mindful, because I think, many of us in our careers have witnessed, compaction of, rate increases where it's not done and you skip a year and all of a sudden it becomes 10% increases if you're not keeping up. And certainly we are being mindful of not putting council or future councils in that position to maintain a solvent enterprise fund. So Aaron can talk a little bit about the strategy and the monitoring approach that we're taking.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Christensen. This is Aaron Floyd, the Utilities Director. And yeah, Councilmember Christensen, you hit the nail on the head on that. We have taken our best assumptions right now on our revenue generation. And at this point, to not further impact the community, we are proposing those deferrals of the previously adopted water and sewer rates. We are proposing that we will bring those back for a further conversation in October, when we have a lot more identified water consumption, payment ability of the community, overall impact on what this will do to our unreserved working capital. We've really laid a lot of this out too on the agenda packet, page 87, where you can actually see all of the different considerations that we will be reviewing before we do bring this back for your consideration in October. We might find ourselves in a situation where all things are good and we can continue on this. We might find ourselves in a situation where we see, hopefully not, but perhaps we find ourselves longer in COVID and we need to actually really be considerate of the impacts of those rate increases to the community. We do identify some longer term issues though, if we do continue to or make a permanent deferral of those rate increases, and they are somewhat significant. The other part of the question I think relates a little bit to the industrial user fees, and those have been, we recommend that we defer those for a year. at this point. And those really are intended to help our local businesses out. We've characterized those as two. These again are our annual inspections where we come in to ensure that no harmful pollutants enter into the waste stream that could upset the process at the water resource recovery facility, WRF. There is about 120 automotive shops and the like, small light industrial manufacturing facilities that we are proposing deferring that for an entire year. And that would save those businesses about $338 a year. And then there are about 180 of our class 2 facilities, and those are restaurants and bakeries, more domestic style waste that we're looking at deferring. There's about 180 of those. And the cost on that permit is about $182 a year.
Yep.
Did that answer your
Okay.
question, Councilmember
Yes,
Christensen?
Yes, it did. And I'll just reiterate my point, which of course you've heard me say before, which is, of all the functions that the city provides, clean water and wastewater is about as essential as we get. So I just want to make sure that we are watching that, and I'll look forward to seeing where we're at in October. I appreciate the work we've done on it, and the fact that we can give some break to our businesses, but we will want to take another look at that in October. Thanks.
Thank you. And we appreciate your trust and support on that.
That's it for me, Mayor.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I have this as aforementioned item about carving off approximately $100,000 of our budget to support policies, practices, etc., that lift up diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism work here in the community. And I know I've talked to Derek a little bit, and I don't know, City Clerk, do we have any public speakers?
No, we do not.
Okay. All right, because this, I guess, leads more into discussion as opposed to a question of staff. But Derek, I know you and I have talked about this a bit already. Can you share just a little bit about how this might work and just add a little context from our conversations previously?
Sure, Madam Mayor and members of the council, I would just draw your attention to page 62 of the packet, which is entitled Table E4-1 General Fund Long-Term Forecast. Thank you for showing that up. If you could just enlarge it just a little bit, I'm going to zero in on, if you scroll down just a little bit, on that number right in the middle. It's 695. So this is the number where we believe going into the next fiscal year, we have revenues over expenditures for next fiscal year. As both Ms. Harnett and Ms. Elke pointed out, this budget was based upon a forecast, and with imperfect information. Our first benchmark is showing that we're headed in the right direction, yet there's a lot of unknowns ahead. So if our forecast holds true, and we'll come back in October through all the way of June of 2021, we theoretically have revenues exceeding expenditures by 695. You can see
Derek, sorry. Could you just, for the folks who are watching at home, that's in thousands, so it's $700,000.
Yeah, sorry, it's $695,000. If I could just, I don't know who has the controls, if they could just highlight that. I don't know if they have the ability to highlight that just for the viewing public. So you can see that number, 695,000. We are showing, next year that we will have a deficit of approximately 1.2 million going into the next financial plan. We'll be able to address that. We'll be jumping into the next financial plan, and we're going to have a balanced budget. It's required by the city charter. This forecast, not a budget, just simply shows, based upon if we continue with the revised expenditures and stick with the same capital expenditures, we would have that deficit. So This is an area that I think the council can look to, whether it's restoring funding for recycling, or it's enhancing funding for our medical and supporting different initiatives. That's an area that I would suggest that the council pull from, rather than one-time reserves. My strong recommendation is that we keep those one-time reserves as a hedge against any future volatility or unknown circumstances. Those emergency reserves are there for an emergency. It's my recommendation that we may need to use those at a point in the future as a bridge, but let's not use them now until we need to get across that bridge. So I know that's a long-winded answer, Madam Mayor, but I just wanted to point the public and the council to kind of that source of funding. Now, if the council's interested in providing some funding, that's where I would pull from, and then I would then turn it back obviously to the council for the specific direction and approach in terms of how we would like to engage the community. I think that it's clear, and I've had conversations I think with all of you, that as staff we have struggled to gain traction with our community about how to lift up diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And so, we would look to council if there's going to be an augmentation of funding, what's the specific approach, whether it's a council task force, whether it's working with the HRC, what are the right approaches that we can really start to make the deep, meaningful change that I think I've heard some of you discuss.
Thank you for that, Derek. So in terms of the conversation today, I do think that I know that Dr. Leola, I was going to call her, suggested today after our press conference that a task force for this idea would be helpful. And I agree. I think that a small group of folks that center people of color that lead the discussion, and so we can ensure that what we're doing is meaningful and actually helpful and needed. I'm not an expert in this area, but that seems key. And also I think, happily, it was just last year, I believe, that we did give some money to HRC for this very issue. And as you noted, we've had a struggle trying to figure out what's meaningful and truly helpful and all those things in terms of this issue. And also it was it $10,000 or $20,000, if I'm remembering right? And this is a more substantial amount, obviously, and it feels like the right amount to do something impactful and real and meaningful. And so I'm hoping that we can include that moving forward, and happy to take your professional advice on where this money would come from in the budget, and interested to hear from my colleagues what feedback they have on this idea. Carlin?
Yeah, that was me. That would be me. Thank you. It's, I'm kind of like you are. You said at the beginning of the meeting, we're kind of a little bit dazed here, kind of all the time these days, just from so much information constantly coming at us. I appreciated your remarks, and I also appreciated Councilmember Stewart's remarks at the beginning, especially her references to the march and protest that happened on Sunday. 3,000 people, very calm. And I think that had a great deal to do, as she mentioned, with the fantastic conversations and efforts that our police chief in particular, but all of our staff, our senior staff, have made to get out in the community and engage in conversations with a number of different types of representatives of people of color, different religions, GLBT, just lots of different folks. And that is exactly the kinds of things that I think we need more of. Real connections, real communication, education about the fact that we share values in terms of diversity and inclusion, safety, openness, all these things, but how we get to them, how we express them, and how we stay hold of them during difficult times is the key. And again, I think that the protest on Sunday was a testament to the positive steps we've made in that direction, and I think we can do more. So that's kind of where I'm happy that you proposed it. I've had a conversation with Derek, as he mentioned shortly before our meeting, to make sure we actually have some money that at his disposal that we can afford. And so I'm comfortable with the amount you suggested and the ideas. When we got the budget, the first thing I looked for was whether our climate action plan was still on schedule, and it is. And the second thing I looked for was whether we still had our diversity and inclusion money in there, and we did, but it is a small amount. So I think we can increase that and really take the opportunity to, as we talked about earlier, creating a new normal that we want to aim for. But I think it comes with work and time and real commitment to the fact that we, all do live in this community, and we can't have more splitting and blaming and that kind of stuff. We really need to talk about those shared values, and that's where I hope something like a task force would go. That seems like a good plan, as long as there's tough, realistic people on there that really want to have those hard conversations.
We will get the toughest, most realistic you can imagine.
Yeah, that's what everybody says, and then they're face to face, and it's harder than you think. So, but anyway, I support that, and I appreciate all the work that staff has done, and the extra effort that Derek made to reach out and talk to us about some of these ideas as they come up, and other than it's just. This is really hard work. We have a community that's going to be suffering in many ways, and there's ways that we can help shape our future and our conversations, and this is one of them. So it's good. Good job.
Great. Thank you so much. Councilmember Stewart.
I definitely love the idea. I think that $100,000 won't go as far as we wish, but it will definitely do a lot more than 20. I think also there's this aspect of making a plan. Well, sorry, having the amount before making the plan is somewhat difficult to do. So I hope that staff has some interest, and my colleagues have some interest in knowing that once we start down a road, if task force or whatever, and we find that we may need more to actually make it successful and impactful, that's a possibility. Whether it's a one-time contractual purchase or whether it's hiring someone, that takes money and that takes time. So I hope that as we're thoughtful and creating something useful and impactful, that's something that people think about in the back of their heads going forward. And I would be happy to be on a task force. I've offered it before, and I would love to do it.
Okay, great. Councilmember Stewart, I was thinking, and I see you, Councilmember Pease, but maybe if we have consensus, which it seems like we might have, if you're open to it, maybe you and I can carve off and be a little first ad hoc conversation that and like move it forward. Okay,
perfect.
Councilmember Pease.
Thank you. I also support the concept. I think that an ad hoc with you two is a great idea, and I think that you may end up finding that hiring, using some of that fund for a consultant to be able to really give us some professional feedback on that. We may or may not be able to just find that resource in the community. So I'd certainly be open to that approach. I also, didn't get a chance to acknowledge that we have had a lot of correspondence. Kind of a form letter has gone out with a lot of folks wanting our our budget to reflect our values in this way. I think we had it was probably close to 1,200 of these letters. So if you're one of those who sent that in, we won't all be writing back to you individually, but I do want to thank folks for that feedback. And I think this is one of those examples that that we do want to put the money to where we can make some improvements. I guess my only other comment overall on, otherwise I'm totally supportive of the staff recommendations. I think in terms of the like the recycling at the parks, I want to honor kind of the level of review that that staff took, and that would maybe take a second look at the October revise, that we don't need to jump on that with urgency. And I think with Laguna Lake, as much as we don't want to let that go, there was a lot of good work done ahead of time in terms of before it even got to the lake. And so I think that it's in motion. This is not a project that's going to get dropped, and it's just unfortunate that we just have to extend that. And then my final comment is just to kind of back up to the very beginning and the meta goal, and just to thank Derek for kind of crafting this concept that, we're all on the same page in terms of economic recovery and resilience, and just to, remind us all that when we talk about that economic piece, that's about jobs. It's about making sure we have childcare. It's about making sure that we have the services to support people. Just so it's about people, it's not just like, oh, this is about business owners. It's about the whole, that flywheel of, gosh, once a business can employ people, employed people are able to take care of their families. They're able to participate in the community, and that funds the services again. And, and it just goes on that cycle. So I appreciate that work. It's not necessarily obvious that that's what has to happen, but that kind of focus, I think, is really appropriate. So, yeah, wasn't good.
Great. Yes, Councilman or Vice Mayor Gomez.
Yeah. So I'll weigh in. Obviously, I'm very supportive of the budget proposal as far as the $100,000. And I like the comments by Councilmember Christensen as far as like really looking at the commonalities that we have. I think we have exposed so many divisions that continually push us apart. And now it's time to figure out how to bring us together as opposed to continuing down a pathway of division, because that doesn't work out for anybody long term. I do want to touch on the recycling component. I'm obviously very supportive of the process that the staff went through breaking things down, but I do want to bring the attention to the fact that we've seen an exponential increase in plastics use and single use in general. So to not realize that that is also going to end up in our parkways, I think is going to be a struggle. We're going to have to deal with it one way or the other. And if we provide trash cans, but not recycling cans, we're creating a very mixed message of we will clean up after you, but we won't help you divert it in the way that it should be diverted. But then we, as an entire county or even country for that matter, continually put the ownership on consumers to recycle. But we as a government agency can't quite put the money behind it in certain scenarios. So I think rethinking, it doesn't necessarily mean we put recycling cans in that and that solves the problem, because realistically recycling is a Band-Aid on a head wound. But we do need to acknowledge the bigger issues, and I'm more than willing to have this discussion more in October when we have a better sense of what's going on. But as we saw in the budget, we're carving out a position for solid waste management. That's a huge part of the realities of solid waste, and it's only going to get worse as the years go on. I'm reading articles on daily about the realities of where we're going with our consumption and the fallout that we will have because of a lack of recycling and just a lack of a circular economy, which is what we're really trying to go towards. And, you know, what that even turns into from an equality standpoint of we're all paying for these things one way or the other. And we saw what we had to pay for in a cleanup in a public space. It costs us no matter what. So those are my only comments.
Okay, thank you for that.
And sorry, Mayor, I forgot to ask if there was consensus on that as we get to it on that 8th principle that kind of laid the groundwork for.
Yeah, that was great, Andy. Thank you for that.
Okay, so a thumbs up from Erica.
Yeah,
Okay.
you know, the language is pretty la-di-da for me, but whatever.
Well, it's a guiding principle.
Yeah, I know. When you talk about doing deep structural changes, I won't be alive, but it's okay. I appreciate the effort.
And the deep, yeah.
Articulating it.
Yeah, there's no smoking in the bars in Paris. Why?
Yes, I know, but that, you know, that was 50 years ago. So I'm, you know, like I said, in 50 years, we're there. I really want to, so I'm fine with that, Andy. And I also want to really thank Vice Mayor Gomez for his continuing reminder that we really cannot put the solid waste issues aside. They are as crucial a part of our climate action plans and actions as anything else. And so I don't, as he said, I don't necessarily want to second guess it right now, but it really, I want to kind of give a shout out that it will be on my top of my radar in October. We cannot keep saying that, oh, well, we'll just have to dump this part. It isn't, we can't do that. Thank you for saying that stuff.
And should we also touch base on the 5-year extension? It sounded like Bob Hill wanted some sort of consensus whether or not we need to apply for that, or is that just?
Yeah, we definitely want to.
Yeah, we're all
have to go for the 5-year rolling permits for keeping, because I'm not going to be dead before that happens.
Gotta happen.
Good, thanks for remembering that.
I would hope that that's not a problem, right? I guess this would be for Bob, is we won't foresee a problem extending that, right?
Hi, this is Bob. Thanks. Sorry, I was just working on my mute button here. I don't think anybody's ever asked for a COVID extension on their federal and regulatory permits, but that being said, we're going to immediately inquire about what the pathway is to renew those, knowing that we've lost those, and try and do it now rather than when we're at the end of the 5-year period when all of this is forgotten about. So I think there is a pathway, and we'll be working on that right away.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the reminder, Councilman Gomez.
All right.
Madam Mayor, if I could just hop in real quick and just to Councilman Gomez's question, I wonder if Michael Borman has any sort of insight whether or not perhaps there's, and I'm sure maybe Councilman Gomez knows as much as all of us, if not more, about whether or not there's any IWMA funding for the idea, or if we're on our own.
I'm getting.
Michael, is that you?
Hello?
I mean, I can chime in on this if you're.
Yeah, please go ahead.
You're obviously looking as the issue that we're going to see coming forward, maybe in the immediate, it would be something we could look at. But as 1383 starts to get implemented, I think we're looking at a completely different financial reality for the IWMA. So I think it's worth having those discussions now, and basically sooner rather than later.
Got it. Well, we'll follow up with IWMA, and I'll talk to Jordan and Michael and see if we can come up with at least, this will be certainly an item that we'll flag for the October revise. And then, Madam Mayor, with your indulgence, in terms of the additional funding for diversity, equity, inclusion, you know, as I think through the idea of a task force, because of course this has been a fairly organic kind of development throughout the day. You know, I wonder if, you know, you asked about staff, and we have staff that's fully subscribed to a lot of our programs, and the staff member in question, of course, is working on important housing. I just, as I think out loud, I wonder if there's if we want to have a conversation of whether or not this task force could benefit from, you know, a facilitator, and if so, do we want to think about some funding to have someone, I think, as Carlin has pointed out, really start to unpack these issues in a very constructive way. So as we walk away with the task force, we've got something really meaningful and actionable to bring back. So I just, you know, I want to put that idea on the table for the council. And if that sounds like an approach that you think, because I think it's hard to be both a task force member and a facilitator. And I think on this issue, you need to have someone who's skilled, knowledgeable, ready, understands the landscape. I think we all know from the efforts at Cal Poly that that's hard. And so if it's not done right, in fact, we can go backwards. And so I just wonder if there's interest in the council and a willingness to approach it that way.
That sounds
Definitely.
really on every level.
Totally. We're wide open to doing the best job possible with the funds that we have now, and with the ideas that we've put forth in terms of what we're looking for. So yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Last thing we need to do is be putting out some talk without walk, you know, so that is, I feel very sensitive to that problem, and I don't want that to happen. It's easy to get into that, and, you know, we have struggled, as people do, with this issue. So yeah, I think we need to go as all in as we can and get it right the first time and get it meaningful the first time. So that sounds great, Derek.
Yeah. So if I may, and I'm sure if Brigitte was in the same room as me, she might be looking at me askance. But if I could just suggest, you know, because I would like, at least my recommendation for the council is to try to preserve as much of the funding to do the work and not necessarily on the process. So I would suggest that maybe $140,000, and we put 40,000 plus. Well, that will bring up the total amount to 160. We have enough money to both facilitate a meaningful process and then have a pot of money then to work with moving forward. And so if that's acceptable to the council, I would just suggest that, just so we don't find ourselves stuck with resources that don't get us there, and then there's just frustration.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm not in the same room as Brigitte either, so I'll go for it.
Brigitte, please feel free to, you know, digitally send some electrons to me.
Derek, you have Derek, we've all gone over this budget in detail, but you do have a better idea of exactly where there might be some wiggle room, and also in terms of tackling this kind of thing. We've all been talking to you as the council and individually about this issue for a number of years in different contexts. So I trust your judgment on what you think the best approach and the minimum amount of funds that are needed. So yeah, I'm fine with it.
Okay.
Derek. Thank you so much. That's really great. Thank you. That's all I have to say about that. I wanted to just offer to my colleagues that my intention, and we'll see if I can do it, because we do have, as Andy mentioned, I think almost 1,300 emails in our inboxes. My intention is to answer those emails, and I heard you say that we wouldn't be getting back to folks, but I'm happy to. I'm committed to doing it. And so I just wanted to let you all know, if obviously it's an effort. And so perhaps if just at least one of us gets back, that would be helpful. Obviously, everybody's welcome to do what they feel good about, but I just wanted you all to know that my plan is to respond to everyone. Yes, Councilmember Christensen.
You know, I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate you volunteering to do that. I would not be, don't have the ability to do that. I was disturbed by, it's hard for me when I have people writing me form letters, because I feel like it was certainly heartfelt and, of course, referring to very difficult events, but also kind of painting a broad brush about what's going on here in our city. And I hope that you'll make some effort to clarify that we have had good relationships with different groups, and that, yes, of course, we can do more and we can do better and we can get deeper. But so that email felt very, very unconnected to what really is happening in San Luis Obispo. So I hope that you will understand what I mean by that and help
Sure.
to correct that impression.
Sure. Thank you for that context. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
I'd be happy to make a motion if we're ready.
Great. Thank you, Andy.
Sure. So I'd like to move staff recommendations. I'd like to add the eighth guiding principle as discussed and as sent previously, and allocate an additional $140,000 to diversity, equity, inclusion, to approximately 40 to 60,000, or 40,000 to 60,000 for consultant, et cetera. And I think that's all the specific direction that we needed to give. Is that correct?
The extension of the Laguna Lake permits.
Yeah, sure. Staff direction. I think they'll do that anyway. And I think our conceptual conversation about the October revise, I guess the one that we all seem to feel strongly about is to make sure that we revisit the recycling. So grateful for the solid waste allocation for a staff position, and want to make sure that we, if we can, provide more tools and resources for that to happen. We'll look at that in October.
Great.
Can we do it?
I will second.
Second.
Well, one of us will.
City Clerk?
Councilmember Pease,
Yes.
Councilmember Christensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Stewart,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gomez,
Yes.
Mayor Harmon.
Yes, and with that, it passes 5-0. Thank you so much. Andy or staff, can you send me, and maybe the rest of the council, unless we already received it, obviously we have a lot in our inbox, that additional piece that you just added on to they're not goals, but yeah, the language, I'd love to see that, just so I have it.
Yes.
Can you also send it to your city clerk?
I'll send it over to you,
Thank
Teresa.
Yeah.
And then it'll come out tomorrow in the action minutes. And we'll be working on a press release, so we're for communication for tomorrow, just to discuss the decision that was made tonight.
Okay, great. Super. It's 8:17 and we have another item, and normally we would take a break. I don't know if folks want to take a break or if they want to just, since
it's going to be a while, we need to take a break.
So,
yeah, just
sorry. Before we go, can I go ahead and I need to recuse from this item, and because of recent work that my firm has done with the architect. And so I'll be out. I'll watch the recording after the meeting. So I'll also just say that I don't have any liaison reports. So I'm checking out.
Bye, Andy.
Bye. Thank you.
Is 5 minutes good for everybody, or would you like the full 10? 5?
5 is good.
It's almost 8:20, so let's make it 8:25. Oh, Andy's not coming back. Just remember that. Waiting. Be waiting a while. All right. Forgot she recused herself, so thank you for that. Thank you for your patience on that one. All right, the public hearing item before us is the review of an appeal filed by San Luis Obispo Architectural Protection of the Planning Commission's decision to approve a 4-story mixed-use project. And so before we get started, each council member, starting with Vice Mayor Gomez, needs to disclose their ex parte disclosures of contact with anyone who has provided information to council members that is not on the record, and that information may be used as part of their decision-making process.
Nada.
I have had no ex parte.
No ex parte.
And Erica, you said no?
Nope.
Okay, I went to the home of Jean Martin, which is right next to this property, and talked with her for a bit. And so, but that's it for me. And so with that, would Community Development Director Michael Codron and Senior Planner Shauna Scott please present the report?
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me all right?
Hey, Shauna, I'm going to go ahead and just say a couple of words to kick us off, if that's all right.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so good evening, Mayor Harmon and members of the council. Shauna's going to be running through the presentation, but I did want to just highlight a couple of things for you as we get going in terms of this being a development project and an appeal. It's a project that has had 2 public hearings with our Architectural Review Commission, resulting in a recommendation for approval, and then 2 additional hearings with the Planning Commission, and then they made their recommendation. And I just highlight that because the appeal itself is fairly procedural in nature. The number of items that are outlined are very specific as it relates to CEQA and the Housing Accountability Act and other aspects of the processing of the application. And so Shauna's presentation is going to focus really on the appeal and not dive into other aspects of the project as much. Although I know the applicant's presentation will get you more of a look at the design and other aspects of the project. So just wanted to let you know what you're in for a little bit there with the staff presentation, and then I'll go ahead and turn it over to Shauna. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. Tonight's item is a review of an appeal filed by the San Luis Architectural Protection of the Planning Commission's decision to approve a 4-story mixed-use project.
Pardon me, perhaps all of us could be turning off our microphone in case that's what's contributing to the echo. Go ahead.
All right, well, we'll see how this works. It is staff's recommendation to adopt a resolution denying the appeal and upholding the Planning Commission's approval of the project. The project site consists of 2 parcels totaling 0.79 acre in size within the downtown commercial zone between Higuera and Marsh Street. Surrounding zones include commercial, retail, and downtown commercial. The project site is currently developed with 2 buildings and a surface parking lot. Surrounding uses include offices, a bank, commercial uses, a senior living facility, and residential uses. Historic structures in the immediate vicinity include the Pollard House, located adjacent to the site to the southwest, the Norcross House across Higuera Street to the north, and the Jack House and Gardens, which are located approximately 100 feet to the east. The project consists of 2 buildings connected by a walkway on the 4th floor. The mix of uses include retail space on the ground level, 8 hotel suites on the 2nd level of Building A, and 39 residential units. An enclosed garage with mechanical parking lifts is proposed on the ground floor of Building B. The project would maintain a driveway through the site and surface parking. Enclosed bicycle parking is provided in Building A. A public patio is proposed adjacent to Higuera Street and between the 2 buildings. Additional landscaping and trees are proposed as a buffer between the development and the Pollard House to the southwest. As mentioned, the Architectural Review Commission has reviewed the proposed project twice for consistency with the community design guidelines and voted in October of 2019 to recommend the Planning Commission approve the project with additional direction, including minor modifications as summarized in the Planning Commission agenda report. The Planning Commission reviewed the proposed project twice as well and approved the project in February of 2020. Throughout the review process, the project's design was modified based on ARC and Planning Commission direction. Following the Planning Commission's approval of the project, an appeal of the Planning Commission's decision was received. Staff's analysis of the appeal is provided in the council agenda report, and I will summarize our response on the following slides. The council agenda report includes the appellant's letter and staff's evaluation. I will go through staff's responses, and please note the appellant's points are briefly summarized at the top of each slide. The appellant states that the project is not consistent with Community Design Guidelines Chapter 5, which is for residential project design. The project is located within the downtown commercial zone, therefore, per the guidelines, Chapter 4, the downtown design guidelines are the appropriate chapter. The appellant also notes Community Design Guideline 1.4 shown here on this slide. Through the review processes with the ARC and the Planning Commission, the applicant incorporated revisions such that the Planning Commission found the project consistent with the Community Design Guidelines. These revisions included a change in material from limestone to brick and wood siding to smooth finished stucco. Additional revisions included modifications to the windows to reflect vertically oriented windows on neighboring buildings and a reduction in metal and glazing between the windows. Other pedestrian level details that were incorporated for consistency with the surrounding area included a bulkhead and use of vertical rather than angular canopy posts. The project proposes decks and balconies, which break up the overall massing. Through the design review process, the applicant lowered the facade of the building proximate to the Pollard House to 2 stories, with 5-foot step backs on the upper floors. This building would be set back 29 feet from the property line, which is about 43 feet from the Pollard House, and landscaping and tall trees are proposed to provide privacy. For additional context, this slide shows the visual transitions on both Higuera and Marsh Streets. The project is proposed to be 50 feet in height with 8-foot stair towers. The height of existing buildings in the immediate area range from about 18 feet to 42 feet. There are other buildings in the downtown that are 50 feet and taller and similar in scale. Regarding compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act, the Planning Commission adopted a Class 32 infill categorical exemption for the project. The state CEQA guidelines state that a categorical exemption shall not be used for a project which may cause a substantial adverse change in the significance of a historical resource. I know this slide has a lot of words on it, but I think it's important to understand the basis of staff's determination of the categorical exemption. The guidelines specifically identify that a project with an effect that may cause a substantial adverse change in the significance of a historical resource is a project that may have a significant effect on the environment. The guidelines define a substantial adverse change in the significance of a historical resource as physical demolition, destruction, relocation, or alteration of the resource or its immediate surroundings such that the significance of a historical resource would be materially impaired. The state CEQA guidelines define material impairment as when a project demolishes or materially alters in an adverse manner those physical characteristics of a historical resource that convey its historical significance and that justify its inclusion in or eligibility for inclusion in the California Register of Historical Resources or local register. A historical assessment of the project that was reviewed by the Planning Commission concluded that none of the adjacent historic properties and none of the more distantly located historic properties will be subject to any indirect impacts that threaten their eligibility as significant historical resources. Therefore, based on the CEQA definition of what constitutes a substantial adverse change, the proposed infill exemption is appropriate. There are no unusual circumstances associated with the project, as the project is consistent with the general plan, the downtown concept plan, and the zoning regulations for the downtown commercial zone. The project's height, size, and scale are generally consistent with other buildings in the downtown, and the presence of historic resources is not an unusual circumstance in the downtown. The infill exemption has been applied to other downtown projects that are located in areas that contain historic resources, San Luis Ranch, for example, San Luis Square, for example. The project was found to be consistent with the general plan as the project site is not located within an identified historic district or neighborhood, and the project site is currently developed with commercial and office development, in addition to residences. The general plan and downtown concept plan call for this type of development. The project also incorporates features as summarized above to provide separation and transition between the site and the Pollard House. The project was revised through the review process and no mitigation measures are identified. The combination of other projects in the vicinity have resulted in a cumulative effect. However, none resulted in a significant effect. Implementation of the project would not result in a cumulatively considerable effect or significant impact to historical or aesthetic resources as defined by CEQA. The Land Use and Circulation Element Environmental Impact Report noted that development under the general plan would increase development intensity within the city and would alter the fundamental character. The LUCIR concluded that consistency with the general plan and community design guidelines would reduce cumulative aesthetic impacts to less than significant. This project and other previously approved projects in the area were found to be consistent with the general plan and community design guidelines. Therefore, no significant cumulative aesthetic impacts would occur. The project meets the government code definition of a housing development project because it is a mixed-use project that consists of 2/3 of residential uses. Regarding the historic preservation ordinance, the proposed project would have no direct effect on historic resources in the area, and the historical assessment concluded that there would be no indirect impacts that threaten their eligibility as significant historical resources. Arriving at the final point, the project was not evaluated by the Cultural Heritage Committee because the project does not contain any historical resources, the project site is not located within a historic district, and the project would not result in an adverse effect on a historic resource. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Have any questions of my colleagues? No? Okay, we've done a lot of questioning previous to this meeting as well. Then with that being said, I'd like to open the public hearing and begin by giving 10 minutes to the appellant. And as a reminder to the appellant, you are entitled to up to 10 minutes of public testimony and may reserve a portion of that 10 minutes for your response. And if you wish to reserve time, can you please let the city clerk know before you begin your time, and she will make note of any time that you have remaining. So city clerk, can you please facilitate the appellant?
Yes.
Oh, here they are, sounds like.
Yes. So my name is Bob Aknefisi. I know most of you. And I will be starting off appellant's presentation, and I will be followed by Dr. James Papp. I would like to reserve about a minute, and hopefully I can get through my presentation quickly.
Before you begin, let me remind you, you have a total of 10 minutes between both of you?
I understand.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Thank you. This project, owing to its height, bulk, and scale, and the proximity of several historic buildings, does not belong in this location. The fact that the structure doesn't exceed the height limit, or in the past, the city has approved other similarly tall buildings in the vicinity of other historic structures, doesn't alter that conclusion. At the end of the day, you, the city council, have the discretion to approve this project if you decide that despite the project's incompatibility with the neighborhood and the historic resources, despite its aesthetic and indirect impacts, that you want the housing. But before you make that decision, you must ensure that you have followed the proper process and that true environmental impacts of the project are fully understood. Only then can the voters decide whether they support your decision after knowing the full impact of the project. So what's the proper process? Staff described the ARC and the Planning Commission meetings, but there is a specific process mandated by the city code, and then there's a process mandated by CEQA. The city wisely set up a cultural heritage committee, which is charged with advising the city council on projects that, quote, may affect cultural and historic buildings and neighborhoods. That's their sole function. They don't make policy. They have no discretion to approve or deny projects. All they can do is to analyze the project's impact and explain it to you in a way that can inform your decision. They're the specialist. The Planning Commission doesn't have that specialty. So without their input on matters that implicate historic resources, you're left to decide the project's impacts without the benefit of expert opinion. Your planning staff is not an expert in this. So here, according to staff, the community planning director decided that referral to the CHC was not needed because the project would not affect any historic resources. But the evidence in the record shows that the project may well affect historic resources. The evidence includes the fact that the project would tower over several important historic buildings that are situated immediately adjacent to the site. The evidence also includes the fact that both the ARC and Planning Commission were concerned about the project's impact on these historic resources and attempted with honestly little success to convince the developer to revise the project to reduce those impacts. The evidence in the record includes the fact that the city commissioned a lengthy report by a private architectural historian who concluded that the project would impact historic resources. I've laid out our arguments and concerns about the city's evaluation process and CEQA, so I don't really want to, I don't have the time to get into that. But finally, the evidence include the expert comments of Dr. Papp and his cohorts, who have unequivocally told you that this project would have a substantial and meaningful impact on this part of town and its historic resources. So based on this evidence, ask yourself, may this project affect historic resources? And if the answer has to be yes, as I think it does, then you have to turn this project around and send it back to CHC to at least get their input before you make a final decision. Now, CEQA process mandates that any project that may impact the environment, including historic resources, be formally analyzed. The process that was afforded by CEQA is intended to assure the citizenry that their elected officials understand and have carefully considered the environmental impacts of the project before making a decision. The CEQA process is also intended to help the citizen voters to understand the potential impact of official decisions so they can decide where they stand. Do they support or not? So the city's unlawful decision not to undertake any formal environmental review means that neither the council nor the general public has a good, solid understanding of the project's impact. How I see it, the city has kept itself deliberately ignorant by avoiding formal environmental review and by refusing to ask the CHC to weigh in on the project's impact on historic resources. What I ask you on behalf of my client and the many individuals who support this appeal is to grant the appeal and not to reconsider the project until it has been referred to the CHC and has undergone meaningful and transparent environmental review. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Papp.
Okay, can you hear me? I see nods. How much time do I have, whoever's in charge?
3 minutes, 3 minutes and 50 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Yesterday morning, I never imagined I'd be standing in front of a line of cops in riot gear. Yesterday morning, I never imagined that a line of cops would take the knee. I was standing with 1,500 young people who realized the world has changed. Encased as they were in armor, the cops realized the same thing. My question to council is, do you? Most of those changes are going to be bad for most of us. The rich are going to do exceptionally well, the poor exceptionally badly, and the people in between will disappear. The pattern for 40 years hitting with massive new force through twin pandemics of disease and joblessness. Unless we make a massive, sustained, and unified effort to fight back. The kids who took the freeway yesterday, the cops who took the knee, were just beginning that fight. And here I am asking why, once again, the city is suspending its guidelines, ignoring extent mitigation, avoiding new environmental review so a multimillionaire can build million-dollar condos for other multimillionaires with glorious views of the 99% in the canyons below. We're sick and tired of listening to the city bang on about housing when what you mean is ultra-luxury housing with a penthouse skybridge and 12-foot ceilings to solve the great California pied-à-terre crisis. We're sick and tired of the cynicism of pitting old against young, as if it's impossible to build new affordable housing that doesn't shatter the beloved sense of place that longtime locals and restoration pioneers have fostered in the North Higuera neighborhood, where calling out has been this project's constituency. 545 Higuera doesn't benefit the people in its working class neighborhood. Sure as hell doesn't benefit the kids I marched with yesterday for a brave new world. It is vertical sprawl, nearly twice the volume and land use per comparable unit as the new developments across the street. That's not dense, not sustainable, not affordable, or a good neighbor for a sensitive historic neighborhood. The future is small, not sprawl. There has to be a moment when the rich aren't allowed to just buy their way out of the climate crisis. Why is community development skirting CEQA for this project? Wealth, class, and race have always been privileged in law. The kids yesterday didn't know they were marching over the bones of Frog Hollow, Slow's own ghetto, plowed under by the freeway in 1954. But now the law is different. Staff have not presented precedents to challenge any of the bases of this appeal. The case needs to succeed on only one of these bases. It is not Friends of 71 Palomar, where I happily assisted the city and was invoked as an expert. But why go to court? What's in it for the citizens of SLO to suppress disclosure of impact? 71 Palomar is a strong addition to its neighborhood because it adhered to the guidelines and went through environmental and CHC review. Of the 8 multi-unit projects CHC approved in my first year 5 years ago, only one has been completed, 71 Palomar. Good review is not the bottleneck for development. Poorly conceived projects are. CEQA was passed by a Republican legislature and Ronald Reagan in an era of protest and optimism. Why is a progressive government a half-century later so terrified of it? A government that started the environmental era with Ken Schwartz, the visionary mayor, the design review mayor. Again and again, community development shows up in the full body armor of infallibility with the weapons of directorial omnipotence and clairvoyance to quash review. I can only respond with what we chanted outside the police station yesterday. I don't see a riot here. Why are you in riot gear? Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Schneider, your mic is unmuted.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Great. It's our 5th time here, and I'd just like to take 1 second to thank staff for bearing with us through now the 5th time we brought this project in front of a jurisdictional body here in San Luis Obispo. And I would like to request that any time remaining we're able to recapture at the end. Next slide, please. I'd just like to review some of our city's major goals: housing, fiscal sustainability, sustainable transportation, climate action, and downtown vitality. And this project responds to 3 in particular: housing, sustainable transportation, and downtown vitality. Next slide, please. As Shauna already went over, the project includes 39 residential units, maximizing the site's density, retail and restaurant amenities, smart interim parking solutions, the parking lifts, downtown traffic mitigation, 27 new on-site trees, 20 more than that are there currently, mid-block pedestrian connections, and public art. This project does propose a major contribution to the revitalization of the south end of downtown. Next slide, please. This slide is just intended to show the footprint of the building that we could propose here, and we're covering about 54% of the site of the 100% that's allowed. Next slide, please. This slide is showing the prominent landscape amenities. Area 1 is a 29-foot wide public gathering space adjacent to the Pollard House. Area 2 is the gap created between the building for trees, light, air, and pedestrian pathway links to connect the new park area to the north half of the site at the mid-block. And Area 3 is a wide sidewalk flanked by a 75-foot long public art mural. And it's just worth noting the current site is entirely paved except for a parking lot, tree wells, and the existing building that is on buildings that are on building A. In the proximity of building A is much closer to the existing Pollard residence than this building is proposed. Next slide, please. This slide is intended to show the pedestrian links. Red arrows show, again, mid-block connections proposed by the project. The image on the right is a clip from the downtown concept plan illustrating a desire to extend the connection from the Jack House Gardens to this site. So in addition to creating a link from Marsh Higuera, we also created our break between the buildings to create a link from the Jack House to our new park area next to the Pollard House. Next slide, please. Per the community design guidelines, we're proposing vehicular traffic enter from Marsh Street and exit on Higuera. Given the direction of these one-way roads, the vehicles accessing the site coming off the highway avoid driving downtown. This aligns with the possible future consideration of the city to close streets north of this property off from vehicular traffic entirely or intermittently. The vehicles enter the parking garage at the interior of the site to avoid any traffic backup on Marsh. The parking is accommodated with a lift system and allows for the conversion of this area to future retail use or residential amenities as car dependency decreases. Next slide, please. This slide simply shows the allowed height and width that the zoning allows at both Higuera and Marsh Street. Next slide, please. This slide shows the height and width as modified by community design guidelines for step-backs at the 4th floor and lower heights at the property line. Next slide, please. And this slide shows how our proposed project fits within the allowed area. And as you can see, we are well within the allowed height limits and within the width limits. Next slide, please. And this is just to show within that area those 20 added trees, which, you know, provide a visual buffer from the Pollard House. Next slide, please. This is a comparison to a project under construction right now. This uncontested building is actually wider than ours. It also reaches nearly to the property line on both street facades. It also has a 3-story facade at the street whose height is only 6 feet lower than ours. And as you can see, the proposed elevation on the right, we are limiting the portion of our elevation that approaches the property line. This is a 3-story brick element. It is still almost 7 feet back from the property line, and it is 44 feet wide. The Bank of Sierra immediately adjacent is 52 feet wide. And if we could back up a slide, actually, if you, looking back at the proposed Higuera Street elevation, you can see this is even further side yard setbacks is only 31 feet wide with a 3-story portion on the street. The goal of this project is to be very proactive from the start. We aim to meet all the design guidelines without pushing limits. We are not asking for any variances or exceptions. We are not pursuing any height increases. We're not pursuing a parking in lieu fee. and we are not maximizing our building area. Next slide, please. And one more slide, sorry. The appellant's argument is that the project is not consistent with the community design guidelines, and they cite portions of Chapter 1, 3, and Chapter 5. Next slide, please. To break down these findings, we need to start with what is relevant. Chapter 3, cited throughout their appeal, is for commercial areas outside of the downtown. Chapter 5 is for residential neighborhoods. Neither of these chapters are applicable to our project. They are design guidelines for different zones with different building typologies. Chapter 1 is an overall goal that is broken down into specific guidelines per zoning's applicable chapter. Our project is located in CD Downtown Commercial, where the goals and design guidelines are outlined in Chapter 4, Downtown Design Guidelines. The appeal is not contending our consistency with Chapter 4 guidelines. Next slide, please. However, we'd still like to address our project's consistency with the community design guidelines. Since Chapter 1 is an overall goal, I will read the appeals argument. Appeals argument citing Chapter 1, design with consideration of site context in terms of the best nearby examples of massing, scale, and land uses when the site is located in a notable area of the city, for example, the downtown Old Town, and 5, protect the scale and character of the neighborhood. And the appellant says the project does not relate and is inconsistent with the nearby examples of massing and scale, and the project does not protect the scale and character of the historic neighborhood. Fortunately or unfortunately, this is not a historic neighborhood. However, many historic single-family residences are in close proximity to our site, which is why we took the approach that we did to decrease the size of the building, create massive side yard setbacks, step down to 2 stories where adjacent to single-family residences, add a pedestrian amenities, and add a significant amount of trees. We also placed the building outside of the Jack House Garden View shed at the south end of our property, so our shadows are primarily cast on our own parking lot. We protect the character by not mimicking historical structures, which undervalues their authenticity. We did not build on top of them like Mance on Marsh did to the Pinho House. We kept our distance and added neighborhood amenities. Furthermore, this project is a mixed-use building and cannot and should be not compared to a single-family residence. Supporting the above findings through languages of Chapter 3 and 5 is not the intent of the community design guidelines. The intent is to guide the allowable uses onto a site. We did this through the 4 entitlement hearings prior to this one, 2 ARC and 2 planning commissions to land on the current approved project reviewed under Chapter 4 guidelines and regulations. This slide shows the project is consistent with other mixed-use projects in the downtown with stepbacks after the 2nd or 3rd floor. The previous version on the left, the current version as proposed on the right. And per the Planning Commission recommendations, the project adopted brick and stucco, replacing limestone, metal, and wood. Next slide, please. Per ARC direction, the facade adjacent to Pollard House stepped down to a 2-story element for a visual transition. Per Planning Commission direction, we increased the height of the trees between our building and the Pollard House. And also per Planning Commission direction, we created a more regular traditional window pattern within the storefront. Next slide, please. For the Planning Commission's recommendations, we removed the strong horizontal elements and replaced them with vertical fenestration to tie in with surrounding architecture, and we reduced the scale of the windows and added more decks to break down the scale and massing further. Next slide, please. In conclusion, we designed this project to weave into the overall vision of our downtown while considering existing buildings as well as future ones. Our downtown, including the south end, will see density growth. We anticipate that while we are now a larger building in this area, this will not be the case in the near future. We're providing much needed housing and adding site amenities that benefit our tenants and our neighbors. I'm wrapping up. We have a favorable historic report and visual study. Our proposal is consistent with the San Luis Obispo Land Use Code and Downtown Design Guidelines under Chapter 4. This appeal is not contending our consistency with Chapter 4 guidelines. We followed all the rules and worked with the city's system of reviews and revisions to reach approval on the design. We hope you vote in favor of our progress tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. City Clerk, are there other public speakers?
No, there are not.
Okay, Councilmember Christensen. Councilmember Christensen?
Okay, I didn't hear you. Cut out there for a second. I'm sorry. Yes, it's getting late, so I will keep my remarks short. I appreciate the passion behind this appeal. I do not buy the legal arguments. I don't think there are any good legal arguments. I will not support this appeal for those reasons. I think that this project, you know, when a project fits what our policies have asked for, when it's promoting several important goals, I'm glad to see it. I find it extremely distasteful to have an appellant present an argument, as Mr. Papp did, that uses lots of trigger words, lots of words that cause a lot of emotion, a lot of drama, doesn't contain any actual facts, and no law or policy at all that apply to this situation. I don't like it when somebody is pitting one group against another. We all have to live here together, and I find it very divisive. I don't buy it. I don't like it. I'm not supporting this appeal.
Okay. Councilmember Stewart?
So this is another one of those I asked. Oh, can you guys hear me okay? All right. I asked a lot of questions before because I kind of, the basics to me was, why not an EIR? You know, how much more does that cost? What, you know, but when I really came down to kind of put it in my layman's terms of, we have a cookbook, right? And we have ingredients and we have a process, and it sounds as though Tenover has gone through that process. I mean, if it was all about just what we like, personally, I like the previous color a little better, but with the sidings, I'm kind of tired of seeing this beige block everywhere with all the new, it's like the new avocado of the 1970s, apparently, but no offense, sorry, I don't mean to offend anyone, just, I think the point is we all have different interests of different styles. It sounds as though the architects went through and listened to the feedback they got back from ARC and the Planning Commission. And my largest concern, well, not one of the largest concerns, was the height and the kind of the extra height that I thought was created by some sort of mechanical piece. I don't know if it was the lift or what it was, but in the end, it's within our limits. And since there is no variance being asked, it's not as though we are doing something exceptional. I love the fact that the shadow doesn't go into the jack house. I think that's very appropriate. And more trees, seems as though we've kind of had them go above and beyond. So I think that was very useful. I couldn't tell, and I don't think as we talked about kind of scrambled brains at this point, I don't know how much this project helps our arena numbers. It didn't seem as though it helped a great deal. So that's unfortunate, but I don't know that necessarily is what our basis of decision is on. So I don't see a purpose in moving forward with this appeal. And I do want to say something too, actually. What's your last name? Councilmember Christensen.
My name's right there.
Yeah, I know, I had to look over. There's the trigger words, you know, I really appreciate you highlighting that, because in the previous very attacking email to today's were very different words, both very triggering, and it's fine. That's what we get to experience as part of what we get to listen to and read. But I don't think it helped in making a decision one way or the other. So just communicate with us like human beings, and I think that would be great.
Vice Mayor?
Yes, I too will not be supporting this appeal. I think we've had this debate and conversation kind of ad nauseum since I've been elected in 2016. Hence, we have these guiding principles for architects to use. And I think the architect in this circumstance showed very well how they stuck to that and actually how they brought it down from scale comparative to what they could have put on this site. I think the appeal, we hear it all the time. They could have gone to the maximum degree and then they would have asked for something smaller. They could have gone to the smaller degree, which they did, and they asked for something different. The basic reality is they just don't want anything on the site unless it looks exactly like a home that exists right next to it, which does nothing for housing as we move into the future. Hence, we have set up different guideposts in these areas in order to maximize efficiency. And in my mind, when you do a building, maximizing efficiency is better for the environment and it's better use of that land in order to utilize the space of our city that is not infinite. I've never really enjoyed Mr. Papp's dialogues that he has done on some of these circumstances where he does use these trigger words that you're not engaging in a real conversation. It's almost like an intellectual, competition. And we're not trying to compete, we're trying to have a conversation. But if you remove that right from the onset, then I think we'll never be able to talk about the true realities of any of these projects. And maybe it's not his intent, I'm not sure. So yeah, those are my comments.
Mayor, may I interrupt? The appellant has 1 minute remaining for rebuttal.
Would they like?
I believe so.
Great, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me the minute I asked for. It's rare. It's never happens that I hear the discussion before talking. It's really disappointing to me personally because it doesn't really sound like anybody there has really read what we, I spent a lot of time drafting because it's, nobody is commenting on anything we put in. The design guidelines, chapter 5 specifically say that the guidelines apply to design of multifamily residential projects. So I don't know why everybody keeps saying they don't. And I mean, why don't you guys address why this project was never referred to the Cultural Heritage Committee? That was something that I spent 4 minutes talking about, and nobody has even addressed it. The Planning Commission doesn't have the expertise on this. The planning director is not an expert. He's a planner. He's not an architectural historian. So it's really, I know you guys are complaining about Dr. Papp, but it's really disappointing to me that you're not grounding your comments on any of the arguments we advanced. I mean, this wasn't just willy-nilly. I spent a lot of time crafting these arguments. So I would appreciate to know why you're rejecting them out of hand without any discussion. Thank you.
Mayor Harmon, I'd be happy to add a couple points of staff response if you're okay with that at this point.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, I did want to address a couple of comments made. One was that the community development director decided not to refer the project to the Cultural Heritage Committee, and I think it's important for everybody to understand that that's not exactly how the process works. Community development is not infallible, but we are good at following process, and we have a process developed that's published and that it's available for applicants and community members and others to understand when you submit an application what hearings that project is going to be subject to. And this project is a project that is located outside of any historic district, and there are no historic resources on the property itself. And by virtue of those two key points, it is not subject to Cultural Heritage Committee review. The Cultural Heritage Committee makes recommendations to the Planning Commission or to the Community Development Director when a project directly involves historical resources. So if it's a new building in a district, if it's a modification, if it's new development on a property with historical resources, we have a whole matrix and a whole list of projects that are subject to Cultural Heritage Committee review. This is not a project that is subject to that review. And then secondly, in terms of the amount of time spent on the appeal, well, staff, and thank you, Shauna, have spent an inordinate sorry, tongue-tied, inordinate amount of time working on the analysis of this appeal and the presentation to you as a council. And this is not a multifamily building. This is a mixed-use commercial building, and there's a difference, and that was clearly spelled out in the agenda report, and the project was evaluated for what it is, a mixed-use commercial building. And so I think that those are the two main points that I wanted to make, simply to say that we have a defined process and we follow it, and it isn't part of our normal practice to exercise discretion willy-nilly about what projects are subject to what public hearings. There's a defined process for that, and this project did go through that process. So thank you.
All right, thank you for that, Michael. Any other comments or feedback from my colleagues? So this feels, I don't know, it feels really, all of my colleagues had really good points, and I'm sure on many levels they are correct. And obviously we have consensus, it sounds like. So my vote won't make a difference, except maybe for Jean Martin, who, as I disclosed in my ex parte, I being in that little house and imagining this giant thing next to her, I just can't do it. And so I hear all the work on both sides, and I know we have guidelines, and my colleagues, I'm sure, are correct in all of that. And still, I feel that I don't normally vote in this way, but it just feels wrong to me. There's a lot of other intellectual and things behind that, but it just feels wrong to me. And so I would go with, I guess, supporting the appeal, but mostly, more than that, supporting, Jean Martin, who lives in the house that I think her parents built, or at least her parents lived in. I think she was born in. Her mom was the first female banker in the city of San Luis Obispo, and I think her picture hangs inside City Hall somewhere. So that is my slightly, feels a little unusual decision-making process for me, but nevertheless, that's where I'm at with that. And so with that, Carlin, would you like to make a motion?
Yeah, and I'll just say that I really appreciate your remarks. I've also sometimes voted with my heart instead of with my brain, and that's okay. So good for you. I think it's appropriate at times. And I will point out that one of the most important things about our city's community design guidelines is that we are not a cookie cutter town. We don't want to look the same. We don't want to preserve a past that's long gone, like, say, downtown Solvang, or look beautiful but kind of boring, like I consider Santa Barbara. We are a town that puts things together in kind of odd ways. If you live downtown like I do, you walk along neighborhoods where from one street to the other, from one lot to the other, you have completely different kinds of architecture. Some people really hate that. I love it. I think that's one of the defining characteristics of San Luis Obispo. And when we had our first council retreat with you, and I talked about San Luis Obispo being funky, that's kind of the part of the thing I meant. And there's parts of LA that are like that too. They're like exactly what you're concerned about, where they have a big building next to a old cottage house that's been there since the 1930s, or early earlier or later. So I'm not sure when all these houses get built. So to me, I understand your vote, but I also want to say that to me, a mix of different buildings is not a tragedy in itself. And oftentimes it creates part of what makes San Luis Obispo special in terms of actually living in it. So with that, I am going to vote to staff recommendation to adopt a resolution denying the appeal and upholding the Planning Commission's approval of this building. And I appreciate all the work that staff, appellants, appellees, and the public, as well as our advisory bodies, did on it.
You said vote, but you meant you wanted to make a motion.
Motion. Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm tired. We're all tired.
Yes. Would someone like to second? Councilmember Stewart?
Unmute.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry. So before, yes, I will second, but I do have to say, Mr. Nafisi said, that we were just kind of throwing things out, and a lot of the discussion that I had with the community director before this was about what exactly our policy is. My background is HR. I have to look at what's the policy and how do I apply it, and that's how I look at this with the city council as well. Is that's why we come together with these policies, is so that people can fill out the plans and go from there. And so that's, as I looked at it, it wasn't as though I just ignored it all. I definitely did read through, and that's why I had the questions I had and the thoughts I had and the questions I had for the community director. So I just hope you know that it's not just as quickly come by as when I'm sharing the decision I'm making. So I guess I want to share that to Mr. Nafisi and Mr. Papp, Dr. Papp. So thank you. And yeah, I don't know what kind of houses, we have next to each other, in the sense that there's all different. And I've been walking this town an hour a night for probably the last 4 or 5 days a week because of COVID, and there's nothing else to do short of read council packets. So I've seen a lot of different styles in our community, and it just it continues to reinforce the fact that we don't have a specific look, and we have to follow the guidelines that we have now. So I'll second.
Okay, City Clerk?
Councilmember Christensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Stewart,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gomez,
Yes.
Mayor Harmon.
No. And with that, it is rejected 3-1 with one recused. Right? Okay. All right. And then are there any, so thank you, everybody. That's the end of that item. And then now we will move on to liaison reports and council communications. Yes, Councilmember Stewart.
I don't necessarily have a report, but I have a question. City Manager, we discussed if you could just share out the eviction difference between the California evictions and the county eviction order. I'd really appreciate that. I've had some comments that we can evict people now because we're in SLO County versus being in the state of California.
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Stewart, if you just indulge me one moment, let me find that information. My hard drive's a little full right now, so I just need to kind of go in and find that email. So I'll come back to that if that's okay with the council.
Yep, thank you.
Anybody else? Councilmember Gomez.
Yeah, I did just want to touch on the fact that I'm stepping down from the liaison position from the, I can't even think of the full name of the environmental group right now. That you are taking over for, Heidi?
The Climate Coalition?
Thank you. Yes, the Climate Coalition. Simply because of my other positions and with work being much more difficult in the current circumstances, I'm trying to pare down what I can and cannot do. thank you, Heidi, for filling in on that. Yeah.
My pleasure.
Madam Mayor.
It's
Sorry,
quiet.
Madam.
Funny, there's
Sorry.
literally kids outside my window, so it kind of was amplifying the funniness of the silence. Yes, go ahead, Derek.
Yeah, sorry, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I presume Christine's still on the line, so if she has any more update information. My understanding, based upon the press conference that was held just yesterday, is that what was announced was that the county order to suspend evictions did end on Sunday. The state order stays in effect as of now and will stay in effect 90 days after the order expires. So evictions are not enforceable for those who are financially impacted by COVID-19 until 90 days after the expiration of the order. So that's our understanding. We'll make sure we clarify, and we'll send out an email out to the city council. I'm just going from the notes from yesterday's press conference.
Yeah, I think that's generally correct, although there were some distinctions, I believe, between the county's order, the coverage of the county's order, and the coverage of the states as it relates to the distinction between commercial and residential evictions. And off the top of my head, I do not have that. I didn't realize this question was coming, so I hadn't had the opportunity to look specifically. But I can do that, and we can get a communication with those clarifications out to you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Then with that, we will adjourn, and the next regular city council meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, June 15th at PM via teleconference. All right. Have a good evening, everybody. Stay safe.